Number 22 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. This committee is meeting on its study of parliamentary duties and the COVID-19 pandemic. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on May 26th, the committee may continue to sit virtually until Monday, September 21st, to consider matters related to COVID-19 and other matters. Certain limitations on the virtual committee meetings held until now are now removed. As just mentioned, the committee is now able to consider other matters, and in addition to receiving evidence, the committee may also consider motions as we normally do. As stipulated in the latest order of reference from the House, all motions shall be decided by way of a recorded vote. Finally, the House has also authorized our committee to conduct some of our proceedings in camera, specifically for the purpose of considering draft reports or the selection of witnesses. On this point, however, I would like to clarify that the clerk of the House has informed the whips that until the House administration finalizes a process to switch between public and in-camera proceedings within the same meeting, all virtual meetings that begin in public must remain in public until the end, and all virtual meetings that begin in camera must remain in camera until the end. Today's meeting is taking place by video conference, and all the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will only show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. To ensure an orderly meeting, I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation in this video will work very much like in a regular committee meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen between either floor English or French. As you are speaking, if you plan to alternate from one language to the other, you will also need to switch the interpretation channel so that it aligns with the language that you are speaking. You may want to allow for a short pause when switching between languages. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. When you are ready to speak, you can click on the microphone icon to activate your mic. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed through the chair. Should members need to request the floor outside of their designated time for questions, they should activate their mic and state that they have a point of order. If a member wishes to intervene on a point of order that has been raised by another member, they should use the raised hand function. This will signal to me that of your interest to speak. And in order to do so, you should click on the participants the participant section on the toolbar below. When the list pops up, you'll see that next to your name, there is a raised hand function, or for some, it may be at the bottom of the participant toolbar. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, please ensure that your mic is on mute. Headsets for all of our witnesses and of course all of the permanent members already know that they are strongly encouraged. Hello, Mr. Reid, you're joining us today. Welcome back. Should any technical challenges arise, for example, in relation to interpretation or a problem with your audio arises, please advise the chair immediately, and the technical team will work to resolve the problem. Please note that we may need to suspend during these times as we want to ensure that all members are able to participate fully. So we have had some of these issues occur in the past. Please try your best to inform me or the chair that you're having some difficulties so that we can try to get you back online or get your audio working. During this meeting, we will follow the same rules that usually apply to opening statements and the questioning of witnesses during our regular meetings. So the witnesses will have 7 minutes for opening statements, and that will be followed by 2 rounds of questions by the members. Just as usual, we will suspend in between panels in order to allow for the first group of witnesses to depart and for the next panel to join the meeting. Before we get started, can everyone please click on the top right-hand side of their screen and ensure that they are in gallery view. In this view, you will be able to see all of the participants. Okay. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the witnesses. This is a long-awaited panel that we've been waiting for. There's been a lot of questions surrounding security and IT, so we're very happy to have our witnesses here today. Mr. Essex, the Associate Professor, University of Western Ontario. Madame Goodman, Assistant Professor, PROC University. And Mr. Roberge, President of Arcadia. Mr. Roberge, I don't, are you here on the screen? Oh, there you are, okay. And Mr. Morden, Research Director at Samara Center for Democracy. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Can we begin with Mr. Essex, please?
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Chair. And thank you for this opportunity to speak to the committee. You know, as I was preparing for the statement, my son reminded me that a group of owls is called a parliament. So may I say what a hoot it is to be here this morning. My name is Alexander Essex. I'm an associate professor of software engineering at Western University. And my research is in cybersecurity and cryptography, but my expertise is in the cybersecurity of elections. I've studied cybersecurity issues of online voting extensively in Canada and abroad, and I frequently share these findings with election agencies and commissions and municipal councils and associations. I co-authored the 2013 cybersecurity analysis of vendor proposals for the City of Toronto regarding their online voting RFP. And I led a cybersecurity study of online voting use in the 2018 Ontario municipal election. In February, I spoke at the New South Wales Parliamentary Committee on Electoral Matters about their online voting system. And next month, I'll be speaking to the Northwest Territories Legislative Committee about their new online voting system. More recently, I've been working with Dr. Goodman, who's speaking next, to try to advance the cause of cybersecurity standards for online voting in Canada. Our country actually has one of the highest rates of online voting use in the world, but somehow we have no standards for any of it. So as you can imagine, this has led to a number of troubling incidents and, in my opinion, a very intolerably high cyber risk exposure. So, you know, I've seen a lot of bad voting technology in my time. So back in March, when Dr. Goodman and I heard that Parliament was studying the issue of remote legislative voting, we wanted to kind of get out in front of any potentially dubious proposals, you know, such as the EU Parliament's idea to use email for voting. So we wrote an article in Policy Options to try to provide some food for thought. And, you know, it was interesting because although the article was about how to do remote legislative voting in a safe, cyber-conscious way, you know, all the feedback we've received revolved around the importance of parliamentary tradition. And, you know, I agree. I mean, parliamentary tradition is really important, but you know, our present circumstance isn't exactly traditional. You know, the Globe reported this week there's been 38 sittings, regular sittings of the House in the past 12 months. You know, that's not tradition. And 30 members voting on a historic spending measure, you know, that's not tradition. Having all the members meeting in a kind of a super committee, but not actually voting, you know, that's not tradition either. So, you know, here we are, you know, what are we going to do? Well, the good news is remote legislative voting happens to be a way easier technical problem than online voting for general elections. And there's a couple of good reasons for that. One is that unlike the general election, you know, Parliament has the ability to support MPs with secure technology and training. But most importantly, legislative votes are not secret. They're a matter of public record, which means you can go back and you can check what was recorded, which means you can actually detect when things go wrong. But you know, here's where we have to be careful because it's not enough to be able to check, you have to actually do it. And you have to have procedures in place so that you know what to do when things go wrong. Now, this might seem like a totally obvious statement, but it's actually not. I mean, it should be, but our experience has demonstrated time and again a kind of bias in the election world to kind of, you know, frankly, only prepare for disasters after they've already happened. So we're saying, you know, let's not wait, let's anticipate, let's build it right from the beginning. Now, let me give you an example. 6 months before the 2018 Ontario municipal election, I did a story with CBC about how I was worried that the cities that were doing online voting didn't seem to have a cyber incident response plan. Now, you know, imagine that the internet goes down on election night. What are you going to do, right? Like, what's your game plan? CBC actually then went and interviewed a number of city clerks, and several of them admitted that they actually didn't have a plan. And one even literally said, "We're hoping nothing happens." So, okay, what do you think happened? One of the online vendors it sort of accidentally didn't provide enough bandwidth, and the online voting websites of 43 different cities, accounting for almost 1 million voters, went down on election night. 35 of those cities ended up using emergency measures to extend the voting period by 24 hours. Now, it wasn't just that these cities didn't have a plan in place, it's that they didn't think it was enough of a risk to even have a plan for. Now, you might think, well, that was just a fluke, but a similar situation happened in New South Wales last year, which is why I was there testifying. I was telling them about what happened in Ontario because it was related. Their registration went down on the eve of the election. Now, you might think, okay, well, this is all good. This all applies to general elections. Legislative voting is different. But just last week in Sarnia, Ontario, a city council vote actually passed by mistake. It turns out that the word disagree sounds exactly like the word agree if the first syllable drops out in a glitchy Zoom connection. Now, fortunately, the staff was on the ball and they caught it, this time. But, what about next time? Obviously, we need procedures to make this kind of checking repeatable and, by the way, part of the ultimate eventual tradition. Now, we've only touched on, accidents and mistakes, but, we're also worried about deliberate efforts from advanced persistent threat actors like nation states. We have seen these kind of advanced threat actors living in the IT infrastructure of our cities. And, if they're willing to spend months mapping out a system for a few $1,000s of, potential ransom money, imagine what they could do to an election. And then why even hack an election when you could just hack the law itself? So let me conclude by summarizing a few takeaways. One, secure remote online voting for non-secret parliamentary divisions is doable, but it has to be done right. There has to be procedures for detecting errors, whether they're due to hacking or accidents or disasters. Someone has to be responsible for checking that an MP's vote was correctly recorded. There has to be procedures for granting opportunity to recover from that error. And we have to confront our temptation to think that nothing's going to happen. I was hearing that, people were talking about tornadoes last night and windows blowing open. And, these sorts of things don't happen until one day they do. So, Madam Chair, thank you for letting me share these thoughts with you. And it would be an honor to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. No, we appreciate that. Dr. Goodman, will you also be making a statement or no?
Yes.
Oh, you are. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Dr. Goodman.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking the chair and members of the committee for the invitation and opportunity to speak today and share my research and thoughts. I've spent the past 11 years working in the area of electronic voting, both within Canada and internationally. This work has involved leading and co-leading projects to examine the effects of remote online voting in the context of municipal elections, Indigenous elections, and a range of political party votes. Beyond social and political effects, I have been looking at the cybersecurity of digital voting from a policy perspective and exploring regulatory possibilities. Much of this work has involved collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Essex. Specifically today, I'd like to make 4 points, and they include 1, why online voting works for legislative voting, 2, the types of remote electronic voting that could work in a legislative context and which is best for Canada's House of Commons, 3, how this work could make the legislature more flexible and accessible in the future, and 4, some opportunities for thought leadership. So to begin, I'd just like to provide the committee with some context about the core debate surrounding voting remotely over the internet. There are 2 primary sides of this debate, which usually focus on deployment in public elections. On the one hand, there's an argument for the benefits of online voting, such as enhanced accessibility, convenience, and increased turnout. And these benefits have been documented in municipalities and First Nations in Canada. On the other hand, however, there are concerns about the cybersecurity and privacy of the vote. In some instances, online voting trials supporting public elections have been halted or canceled due to security concerns or the detection of vulnerabilities. 2 examples include a system in Switzerland and one in New South Wales, Australia. So this debate is relevant for the committee's consideration because remote online voting can support Parliament to continue during the pandemic without sacrificing representation and the inclusion of members. At the same time, there are unique characteristics about legislative voting that make remote online voting possible and the cybersecurity more solvable than in public elections. And as my colleague mentioned, this was outlined in our brief to PROC. So an MP's vote is a matter of public record. The federal government has resources and capacity to support the cybersecurity infrastructure and implement necessary policies and procedures. So based on our review, there are 4 main types of electronic voting that could enable remote voting for MPs. There's email voting, and that's where a member receives a ballot form electronically via email and submits their vote via email. And this approach is being used in the EU Parliament. There's web-based voting, which is used in public elections and party votes in Canada. This involves ballots being accessed and cast via a website. And this is an example of this is the House of Commons' member hub. The UK House of Commons is, member hub system. Application-based voting is where members download an application to access and cast ballots. The Chamber of Deputies in Brazil has taken this approach. And then there's video voting, where members vote via video by a show of hands or a voice vote. And this is being used in local councils across Canada. And Belgium, for example, is using this for its committee votes. All of these approaches have benefits and challenges, with email voting being the least secure and posing the parliamentary votes. These are some benefits of the approach. It poses less risk, although there are still risks that need to be managed. It is the easiest to deploy and requires less technology, and it interfaces more closely with the parliamentary tradition of standing in the House. Now, implementing video-based voting would require establishing some procedures. Here are some examples. For one, establishing whose responsibility it is to watch and record a vote. This could include staff members, MPs, party whip offices, or perhaps a special segment of staff who support digital House matters. One consideration here is thinking about putting a process in place where votes are double verified by either 2 individuals or across 2 different areas. Another example would be mandating neutral backgrounds in video conferences to ensure there are no images in the background that could send messages or carry a partisan tone, which couldn't be visually signaled in the legislature. A third example would be allowing the speaker to call for a revote in the case of technical errors. This was a procedural change that was introduced in the UK, for example. This does not mean video voting is without challenges or would work in all contexts. Anonymous votes, for example, would not replicate well on Zoom. My third point has to do with making the legislature more flexible and accessible. So enabling a system of remote online voting could have future benefits to keep legislative business moving in times of crisis, COVID, climate change, future viruses, but also in the context of accessibility for individual MPs. The option of remote online voting could provide MPs with improved access to voting under special circumstances, such as in situations of maternity leave or parental leave following the birth of a child, in times when an MP's constituency is faced with a specific crisis and they're torn between being in their community or advocating for their constituents' interests in Ottawa, in cases of sickness where a member is not able to physically attend the legislature. This committee considered proxy voting and electronic voting in 2016 as part of a study on how to make the legislature more family-friendly. However, no recommendations were made at that time. Other legislatures, like the UK House of Commons and Australia's House of Representatives, do allow for proxy voting for new parents. While Canada's House of Commons currently requires a member to be present in the chamber to have their vote recorded. I understand that witnesses have been unanimous that the committee consider these changes for the pandemic only. However, thinking about how such a system could enhance the participation, representation, and inclusion of members in certain circumstances is part and parcel of modernizing the legislature. In closing, while the committee does not have to engage in the typical online voting debate we see with regards to public elections, it does have to engage in its own debate about maintaining parliamentary tradition versus modernizing to become agile in uncertain times. Finally, there are 2 opportunities for thought leadership. The committee's work in this area on policies and procedures for remote voting could not only benefit the House of Commons in the future, but also other legislatures across Canada and abroad. And then second, there is currently no regulation of remote online voting in Canada. So as we think about the adoption of voting technologies in the legislature, we might also reflect on how this conversation could later benefit electoral integrity in the context of public elections. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Goodman. Next up, we have Mr. Roberge.
All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the committee for inviting me to participate. I will start with a little bit about me. I have worked in cybersecurity, facing the most advanced cyber attacks in the world for the past 20 years, both within the government and as an entrepreneur. I am currently leading Arcadia, where we are providing services, acting as the last line of defense to detect intrusions, leveraging our proprietary software. We have been operating remotely and decentralized since I founded Arcadia 10 years ago. I also participate within the Bitcoin community, both publicly and within invitation-only forums, as a think tank in security and game theory in the ecosystem. I came with a few points to share with this committee while listening to the previous meetings. Although I only listened to a few, I do have some observations. I observed a resistance to change, driven to keep what works well, and due to past errors, hurting collegiality. It is true that change is a threat vector that can be exploited by others. However, being static is also a weakness that can be exploited by preventing us from fixing what we broke in the past or what needs to change to adapt. With the world changing around us and very fast, the rise of artificial intelligence combined with cyber domain attacks, social engineering driven by artificial intelligence, I believe we need to change and adapt, and even better, be ahead of the curve. To do so and to dwarf non-genuine influences, we need to strengthen collegiality. It is by knowing each other more intimately that we will detect and see attacks against us, that we will have the agility and the speed necessary to react before damage is done. For example, limiting or reducing face-to-face interaction has been brought up by many during the hearings as a change with negative outcomes regarding the effectiveness of our democracy. These are the kinds of changes where we need to be agile and be able to bring back collegiality. I heard that some get-together dinners were removed from the tradition of the House of Commons, where opposing parties were discussing in a more relaxed and convivial atmosphere. I would advise that such settings will be very important in our defense against cyber domain attacks. Understanding the nuances of our interpersonal and professional communications is essential in detecting subtle attacks against us. Our adversaries will look for ways to interfere with all forms of communications, not just written kind in emails, text, and online postings. For example, during video-based presentations, they will disrupt or could disrupt images and the tone of voice in an effort to inject or alter messages of body language, facial expressions, and intention of our elected officials. Without our collective understanding of what right looks like, we will fail to see the subtle attacks that will eventually lead to more brazen and flagrant attacks. I also observed concern with e-voting. E-voting and the use of technology should complement and reinforce one vote. Make sure your voice can be heard and make sure it is accurate. The way I see technology and software is to augment our reliability and agility in our voting process and perhaps even make it anti-fragile. We need to move away from using a single platform to vote in favor of adding technological capabilities to strengthen the reliability and the resiliency of voting. Perhaps we should vote on video as well as sign a vote with dedicated secure hardware. We can then audit that our vote is correct. Perhaps we could timestamp our votes in the Bitcoin blockchain, making them forever verifiable. In short, diversity, one might say multi-factor authentication, in our methods of conducting business, face-to-face, video, voice, electronic, makes it more difficult for our adversaries to achieve their desired outcomes and improves our opportunities to detect their attacks. These ideas improvements should come gradually, holistically, and in an agile process. If not already in place, I would recommend the House of Commons put in place such processes supported with permanently ongoing threat and risk assessment versus the typical static evaluation that ends up on the shelves collecting the dust to check some accreditation marks. In closing, the three observations I described are woven together by a common thread. That is to say that defending ourselves is more than simply a technology issue. To protect the integrity of House of Commons in the parliamentary process so that legislation, policies, and directives of the Government of Canada truly represent the intentions of the electorate, we need to provide to the electorate the highest level of confidence that the actions of the House of Commons are truly what they are supposed to be. Regardless of the method of operation, in person or virtual, The importance of this cannot be overstated. We require defensive measures assessed and developed in a holistic and continuous threat risk managed manner that address all forms of attacks, such as political attacks on infrastructure and people, attacks that attempts to compromise the integrity and loyalty of our people, attacks that attempt to compromise or disrupt the integrity of our supply chains, attacks that aims at disrupting our ability to determine truth from fiction, and of course, attacks that attempts to disrupt or compromise our IT systems. There is no higher calling than to protect our democratic institution and our country. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Roberge. Mr. Morden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks so much to the members of the committee for this opportunity to address you. My name is Michael Morden. I'm the Research Director of the Samara Center for Democracy. The Samara Center is an independent, nonpartisan charity that is dedicated to strengthening Canadian democracy through research and programming. We want to thank the committee for undertaking this study, given the scope of the crisis, the scale of the government's response, and the enormous uncertainty that exists. Parliament is not optional in this time. The only question to address ourselves to is how to make it work. And arriving at a solution that commands some measure of cross-partisan support is a solemn responsibility that falls to you. I understand, our presentation comes perhaps somewhat late in your deliberation, but nevertheless, I think it's useful to consider the political and principle questions at the same time as the technical ones, to remember why we're pursuing this and to not miss the forest for the trees. The Samara Center supports a move in the immediate term to a hybrid virtual in-person sittings of the House of Commons with remote voting for those who are unable to attend in person. We think the hybrid virtual model is the best among imperfect options. To be clear, the best of all versions of the House of Commons is one in which 338 individuals share a room, and there's lots of reasons for that. We've been a consistent voice in calling for members to spend more time together in Ottawa to facilitate collegiality and to build informal relationships between members, parties, and chambers. But given the limits imposed through physical distancing and credible concerns about travel, in our assessment, that option just isn't on the table. And we need a full service parliament now and in our view through the summer. I hope the option of a full in-person convening of the Commons will return soon, but we're clearly in a state of deep uncertainty. As the second largest country on earth, we may find we're uniquely challenged to get back to full physical national sittings of the parliament. So it's a necessary step in the immediate term and a prudent step for the middle term to institute capacity to resume full parliamentary business with remote participation. I want to foreground the values which lead us to that conclusion. In times of uncertainty, it's often worthwhile to return to first principles. Parliament exists for scrutiny, to enable the passage of legislation, and also for democratic representation. And the most desirable pandemic parliament is one which strikes an appropriate balance between all of those functions. We feel the current approach, employing a handful of day-long sittings and committee work, is not sufficient to deliver the level of scrutiny, productivity, and representation that's required. We also take issue with any approach that would convene the Commons but exclude most of its members, for example, by operating on the basis of a skeleton crew of 40 or 50 MPs. That approach facilitates some scrutiny and enables the passage of legislation. In our view, it comes at the expense of democratic representation. Some 18 million Canadians voted last fall to send individual representatives from each of their communities to Ottawa, and it's no small thing to render the vast majority of those communities unrepresented in the Commons while these momentous decisions are being taken. So for that reason, we think the best balance between scrutiny, productivity, and representation is struck with a hybrid parliament permitting remote participation, including remote voting. The technical challenges posed in such an approach are not insurmountable. Many other jurisdictions have walked this road. There are different models available to us, as Dr. Goodman described, and the House of Commons administration deserves particular praise, in our view, for adapting and adding capacity with alacrity. So in our view, there's no question that remote voting is feasible. It's feasible to do it securely, and it only waits on a decision by parliamentarians. In the early stages of the pandemic, we supported the notion of incremental adaptation. Moving to a hybrid virtual parliament was never going to be as simple as flipping a switch. We now have proof of concept, both in the experience of other jurisdictions and also in Parliament's own experience of authorizing some virtual conduct of some business and activity. So at this point, we hope that the committee will provide the Commons with a strong prompt to move as quickly as is feasible to resume full parliamentary business with remote participation. We believe that legislative business should not be limited to the pandemic response alone. We welcome the granting of committees the opportunity to discuss other issues. We'd like to see that reflected in legislative work as well. There are a range of issues which were urgent in January and February of this year and are no less urgent now. And just as doctors warn about, the possibility of secondary health crises that are a consequence of delaying treatment for non-COVID-19 related illness, Canada may also become vulnerable to multiple crises during and after the pandemic if we can't attend to the policy needs that existed before it. We also believe that the hybrid virtual parliament's business should include opposition days and private members' business. No one has all the answers right now. This is a really good time for multiple inputs. So in closing, I just want to mention briefly that the Samara Center periodically surveys MPs, and we're doing so now precisely on the question of how the pandemic has and should affect parliamentary work. We're always keen to develop an accurate picture of members' views on this issue and develop a body of evidence and encourage all members to make use of this anonymous platform to share your expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Morden. We'll continue into the questioning portion of this panel, and we'll start with Mr. Richards for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'll start with Drs. Essex and Goodman. Listening to some of the comments made by Mr. Morden just now, you talked about in your opening remarks, both of you, about voting, and you've expressed your concern about voting for electoral events being done electronically, but you indicate that maybe it could work in the parliamentary context. But I guess I didn't hear from either one of you any thought about some of the other things that kind of lead into voting. You talked about the technicalities of it, and that's important too. But a lot of the things that lead into it, and Mr. Morden was just talking about some of those things, the other things that occur in Parliament besides obviously just the voting aspect of it. Things like, the debates that go on in the House, the input we get from constituents, consultations we have, and discussions that we have within our parties and within our caucuses. The committee studies that happen, all of these things, and then even the stuff that happens in the hallways and the corridors and whatnot. Mr. Morden kind of identified how important some of those things are. I wanted to see if either one of you had given any thought to those things and how, when we're dealing with online or remote voting, whether there'd be an impact on those things and what that might mean for democracy or for Parliament. Drs. Goodman or Essex, did either one of you have comments?
Yeah, okay. So I can.
Oh, sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, obviously, the ability to have and engage in parliamentary debate is central. It speaks to the scrutiny function that Mr. Morden spoke to. Presenting motions. So my testimony focused more on the voting aspect, like you said, but that's not to negate the importance of those functions. And I don't think that they can be replicated in an online setting the way that they take place in the legislature. But I certainly wasn't advocating for that, but I think that we need to be able to find a workaround in the interim to, keep representation moving and ensure that we're not having, these modified sittings with a few MPs where representation is compromised.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt, but I will, because you raised something I just wanted to follow on. You said that we need to have a workaround in sort of these kinds of situations. So then would you be advocating this as just a solution for these types of emergency situations, or do you believe that that this would be something that would become permanent or should become permanent?
I definitely think this is a solution for emergency situations. So definitely times of crisis. My point was that we have an opportunity, a crisis now, unfortunately, which presents challenges, but also presents opportunities. And that's not to say that we won't have a crisis in the future. Government too often is reactive instead of proactive. So let's use this time to develop a thorough, robust solution for emergency situations, because there could be another virus, there could be a revisitation of the COVID rates could increase, there could be an issue of climate change. My only point about considering modernizing the legislature was specifically enabling remote voting, or considering enabling remote voting for specific circumstances that individual MPs may be in. But I definitely am part of the camp that believes that Parliament functions best when members are in the House actively debating and engaging.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just real quickly, Mr. Morden, given those concerns that you raised about some of the other functions of Parliament, how difficult they might be to function appropriately, do you have concerns about the thought of things like virtual sittings or remote voting becoming permanent?
I think what I have received from these deliberations is near universal consensus that these should be a temporary measure. I think it's important that members bear in mind that the potential negative consequences. We don't want to diminish the costs, which we think are real. But this isn't, in my view, about modernization. It's really more a radical adaptation for a radical time, which we hope won't persist. And I think we can feel relatively comfortable. I reject the notion of a slippery slope, in that I'm fairly confident, based on the deliberation I've heard from members, that they're able to distinguish these times from normal times and would prefer to return to a normal parliament as soon as possible. So I think we have to do what we've done in so many sectors, which is embrace choices that wouldn't be acceptable in normal time.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll turn to Mr. Roberge. As an expert in security, I wonder if you could just give us some thoughts on like the threats that would be there for both virtual sittings of the House and remote voting, and what would be the differences in the source and type of those threats between those two things, between the idea of televised debates and then off-camera electronic voting.
Right. So I think, without going into we cannot replace the beer time, the get-together time, social angle of the debate, technically, I think it will be possible. I don't know that it is at the moment, but at the speed that artificial intelligence is going, and if we're not careful, it would be possible eventually to do deep fakes, right, during video conferencing. Potentially.
Thank you, Mr. Robert. That's all the time we have. Next up is Mr. Turnbull.
Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I really learned a lot from your testimony. I'm going to start with some questions from Mr. Essex and Ms. Goodman. I read your article in Policy Options, and I thought it was a really big contribution to this dialogue. Both of you, I assume, still agree with, based on your testimony today, a quote in the article is, "Parliamentary voting is entirely workable from a cybersecurity perspective." Would you say that you still stand by that claim, Mr. Essex?
Well, there was a bit of editing that went on after the fact, but what I'm simply here to say is that compared to the cybersecurity risks of online voting for general elections, online voting for legislative or parliamentary divisions doesn't pose the same sort of basket of threats, and that it is possible to do with careful design.
I got that, and I'm going to ask you more questions about that in a minute because I think that's essential to make that distinction. Ms. Goodwin, would you say you stand by that quote or that claim?
Yeah, I would echo what my colleague Dr. Essex articulated, which is that there are obviously challenges that cybersecurity experts in the cybersecurity community raises with respect to secret ballots in public elections, right. And because it is an open public vote, we're able to overcome some of those in a legislative context.
Got that. Yeah. So legislative voting or parliamentary voting is highly distinct from general elections. And I know your work, both of you have done a lot of work on electronic voting for general elections, but you make the distinction in that article, which I thought was really important for this debate and discussion, which is that, parliamentary voting is a matter of public record. So in virtue of that, it's transparent, it's open, it poses less risk for interference. And, I think there's a really, important claim to be made there. You also mentioned two other points, which I thought were important. You didn't stress those as much maybe in your opening remarks, so I'm going to ask you some more questions about those. You also said that federal government has cybersecurity infrastructure to be able to do remote online voting for legislative purposes. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you know about the cybersecurity infrastructure? Because we've heard from other witnesses that it's highly robust, and I'm satisfied as a member of parliament that it's really robust, but I wondered if you could fill us in on anything you know.
Yes, thank you to the member for the question. When we said that, we are speaking as members of the public looking inside of what is ultimately a mostly opaque, infrastructure. So the intelligence community, the CSE, we don't really know what exactly they do, but we do know that they're there, and we do know they have a mandate to provide security services for government. I don't think that if you're a municipal council, you might have access to that level of assistance.
It's certain that it's world-class cybersecurity infrastructure. Are you fairly confident that that's what exists on Parliament Hill, and the House of Commons is generally very secure in terms of its IT infrastructure?
Well, I never, say something is secure until I have an opportunity to examine it. So I don't really know what Parliament actually does, but my expectation is that as a Five Eyes member, that we would have top, world-class cybersecurity. I've spoken at the CSE before. They are very capable, but again, as a member of the public,
Okay. Thank you. And I want to also ask about the other point that you made about the distinction between these two types of online voting. The other is that the federal government generally has the capacity to train MPs on the new procedures. It's clear that the federal government has a lot more capacity than maybe other levels of government. Ms. Goodman, do you want to speak to a little bit about why that's so important and why that's important for this distinction?
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe when we wrote the article, we were more thinking of or framing it in the context of perhaps web-based or application voting, where you would go on a website and click, and maybe intent is signaled a little bit more easily there. But upon reflection, I do think that the video voting would work better for Parliament for the reasons outlined.
That's good. I was going to ask you that because you mentioned 4 different types of electronic voting, but I noticed you focused on the video voting. You made a claim about email voting being the least secure, but you didn't cover web-based or application-based, and I wondered why you shied away from that. And what I think the video voting, we've had some conversation about this, is probably the easiest to implement, and maybe like you said, most closely mirrors how we vote in the chamber. At the same time, is there not an opportunity here to develop an application or have a web-based voting system like the one that the UK developed, which we've heard from those witnesses was quite robust?
So excellent questions. Just really briefly, with respect to procedures, so any remote online voting system that the Parliament were to adopt, we would require procedures for. And so with respect to the article, we were really talking about cognitive biases and ensuring that the proper procedures were in place so that MPs could check their vote and ensure that that is how they intended to vote. Because as you heard from Alex, even in the case of Sarnia, where there's video voting, there was a glitch there and it flipped the vote the other way.
Thank you, Dr. Goodman. That's all the time we have. Next, we have Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much to all the witnesses. It was particularly interesting to hear you, very fruitful. I have many questions. I'll try to get them all in. Mr. Morton, you talked about the fact that Parliament is not optional, and we will end up with delays to deadlines to make decisions. So Parliament is supposed to open September 20th. What's the importance of having a voting system put in place by September 20th?
I'd like to see a voting system in place even before then. I think there's a strong argument for a summer sitting. I understand that there are technical steps to be taken, but I've taken confidence from the comments of the speaker and others. It seems as though the House administration has adapted very quickly, and I would expect those actors to sound a strong note of caution if they didn't feel confident that they could deliver remote divisions, because if it all went haywire, they would be the ones who are blamed. So I would like to see even faster progress than that. I think it's important that Parliament makes up for lost time and starts to move, a broad agenda of parliamentary business forward in order to keep up with history, which is moving very quickly right now, and in order to resume the issues that were important.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Question for Mr. Roberge. We talked about many voting systems, the importance of having a vote where you can see the person, but if we have a recorded division, it can be very long, especially if we have to vote on many different items at a time. We also have a very brief window to vote. If there's a technical problem when it's our turn to vote, there could be a problem there. So I'd like to hear your views on a system where we could vote electronically, say yes or no, or yay or nay, and then record a video us saying, I'm voting yay for Bill C so-and-so, no on Bill C so-and-so. We'd get that by email and validate it. And that way we could do it in a wider window, double validation. Is that a good solution that should be analyzed? Yes, Ms. Normandin, that seems very good. As I explained in my opening statement, redundancy is probably the most important for the reliability of votes and the agility that members have in expressing their vote. I'm not sure, but I think you already have applications with authentication systems where the technical team of the House of Commons, who I know are very highly qualified, I trust them, and I think in general they have the resources to get good results. Perfect. So if we didn't have to choose a system at the outset, but have the criteria in place, that would be a good idea. Yes, and as Mr. Morton said, it's a question of agility. You have to be able to move quickly to remain effective, to have a parliament. And what's important is to evolve in our initial experiments. Another question for Dr. Essex or Dr. Goodman, but anyone can answer if they wish. If we install a remote voting system, do you have any kind of recommendation so that even members in the House vote that way, or could we vote in two different ways at once? What's ideal?
Well, thank you for the member for the question. I'll try to tackle this one. There's strength in simplicity, especially when we're talking about cybersecurity and technology. So one of the reasons why Dr. Goodman and I have kind of gravitated more towards the video voting as an approach is that it does have a certain simplicity to it. It's a lot easier to match a person's face and the voice. Deep fakes notwithstanding. Whereas when you are voting through an app, what the system is recording is not that you voted, but rather that somebody with your credential voted. This is exactly what we saw in the Ontario municipal election when people were receiving pins for their children that were in university, or spouses voting on behalf of each other and so forth. So video voting does provide a nice way to sort of see the authenticity of the person there, subject to a number of other questions involving some of the issues discussed. But I would just say that whatever you do gravitate towards, that I would encourage you to look for a sort of an elegant and a simple option. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Mais peut-être juste pour...
Well, perhaps to clarify that, if we have an electronic voting system, at the same time as some members are there physically in the House, should everybody use the electronic voting system? Or should we have some people voting in the House physically and others electronically?
Thank you again for the question. If I could sort of borrow a line from the speaker who I've been watching during these committee proceedings, I suppose that would be for the members to decide for themselves. But I can tell you that in the Ontario municipal election, we saw this sort of hybrid model in many Ontario cities. So some people would go to an in-person place to cast a paper ballot. Some people would vote online. Some people would vote via the telephone.
Thank you, Dr. Essex.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Ms. Blaney for 6 minutes, please.
Well, good morning, and thank you to all of you so much for your testimony today. I guess the first question I have is around voting, and one of the challenges, of course, as we move forward, and first of all, just for the record, I agree that if we're going to do some sort of virtual voting, I would much rather see someone's face in the screen voting one way or another. I think it would allow us all to have that high level of accountability. And as a more far away parliamentarian from Ottawa, I also really respect the fact that making and having the ability to choose the health of yourself and your loved ones and your constituency is also a priority during this time. And I agree that I think the hybrid model is a good step forward. One of the challenges that we've heard, though, is how many decisions are actually made in the House through voice vote. And so I'm just wondering if there's, and maybe I can start with you, Ms. Goodman, if you have any information or thoughts on how to do a voice vote during this time.
A voice vote, you mean online, right?
Yeah, and with the hybrid model.
Yeah, so I have some hesitations about the hybrid model, only based on what I've seen. I think we want to be careful. I mean, I definitely see the value in it, and I know that other jurisdictions around the world are adopting it. I think I'd like to watch how that plays out. I think we have to be careful to make sure, we're not creating two tiers here where some MPs have, better access, for example, if it's not just a vote and we're having debate and we're doing, some in-person debate in the legislature and some debate online. We're not creating sort of two tiers of classes here, and all MPs have equal access to speak and ensure representation. With respect to the voice vote specifically, I think it depends on the nature of the vote, but as I understand it, when you call a vote, there would be the yays and the nays.
Mm-hmm. And usually they're in the same room, so you can measure the loudness, and that lets you know which way we're going.
Right. So you could have a system where you could go through first, and everyone who is yay would raise their hand and go through and count them. And then you could have the nays and go through and count them. But this is really where I think it speaks to the importance also of double checking and having more than one actor to verify the vote.
Thank you. One of the other challenges, of course, is as we're in this model, we have different challenges for all members, just the realities of their life. So one of the things we've had several folks talk about is the predictability, so that we know when we're voting. And maybe I could start with Mr. Morden, if you could speak to sort of the inclusiveness of having predictable times around voting.
I think that's important. And in fact, I think that's also a discussion for in-person parliament when it resumes. It's incumbent on government to adapt its approach to how it wants to manage parliamentary business in order not to exploit this adaptation to alter the the power balance or to acquire greater control over parliamentary business. I don't have a technical fix to that. It's something which deserves scrutiny, and certainly would intend to provide that to the limited extent we're able to. But I think it's an important caution and something which this committee could reasonably seek assurances from the government.
Thank you. Mr. Essex, do you have anything to add to predictability around voting times?
Of course, approaching this question from the sort of my experience in general elections, predictability is right at the sort of core of the democratic principles that you might have for an election, and that the predictability would feed into the sort of notion of fairness, and that everyone has an opportunity to vote. And unpredictability has, of course, very, very detrimental consequences to the democratic process. So one example from the other day was there was a curfew in Washington, D.C., but they were also voting. And so there was an interference there between the police curfew and the actual vote. And so there was some exemption given to voters, but then law enforcement wasn't quite adhering to that. So it created a very unpredictable environment. And of course, that's deeply concerning. So yes, predictability in votes, whether they're in general or legislative context, is an absolute must.
And my final question is for Mr. Robert. One of the things that you talked about in terms of our security is the importance of creating those relationships and collegiality. So I'm just wondering if you could speak to that. I know one of the biggest challenges for all of us is we're not in the same space in the same way that we usually are, and that is where we build relationships across party lines. And but I think it's important to connect that sort of connectiveness personally also with our ability to manage security.
Right. I mean, so having been running a business for 10 years, decentralized, we need to meet and as often as possible as a whole team, right, to build up this collegiality. It's really, and in the case of the parliament, what I see is to avoid future deepfake problems. I don't think it's a problem at the moment, but there's subtle attacks you could do, like you could lower the quality of video and connectivity of someone temporarily when they're actually actively debating, for example, until it frustrates them and they disconnect, right? There's very subtle level and different levels of attacks that we will be facing in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Roberge. Next up, Mr. Broussard for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. Dr. Goodman, you talked about the potential of flexibility and accessibility. On one hand, you said that you agree that during a crisis, it's a good mechanism in order to move to remote voting. The Constitution dictates that Ottawa is the seat of Parliament, and so there are some challenges. You mentioned as well that, in the circumstances where they may have, or an MP may have busy constituency schedules, the issue of maternity leave, and other examples that you gave. But there are circumstances where members, for example, could use that as a reason, but there may be situations where they do have a busy constituency schedule and they need to be back in their riding and not come to Ottawa. There could be a situation where there's a close election and they don't want to be in Ottawa and would use remote voting as a mechanism to not be back in Ottawa. There could be situations where an MP is facing, for example, very serious criminal charges and doesn't want to face the scrutiny of the parliamentary press gallery. So how would you propose to differentiate between what would be, as you said, those convenient situations to the other types of situations that I mentioned, and have MPs avoid being in Ottawa?
Thank you very much to MP Broussard for the question. I appreciate it, and I'm glad you're allowing me the opportunity to clarify. So I think with respect to the birth of a new child, I think there's precedent there in other legislatures in terms of proxy voting, and I think there's a good argument to be made there for extending that to electronic voting. With respect to MPs, individual MPs, I wasn't necessarily thinking of busy schedules. I was more thinking of crises. So for example, say there was some kind of flood in an MP's community and they needed to be there, or a big fire or some kind of crisis. I'm thinking on the level of, we think that we're having a macro crisis now nationally in terms of COVID. I'm thinking of a micro crisis in a constituency. And micro being small because it's affecting a particular area, but I think that could be very well defined so that it wouldn't be taken advantage of. And then with respect to sickness, I've seen, no example comes to mind right now, but I have seen or heard of situations before where, a member has been battling cancer and either wasn't able to attend a vote to participate, or some members have come very ill just to vote one time. In cases of sickness and health like this, the member could stay in the hospital or at home and rest and be able to participate. So I'm thinking of extenuating circumstances here, not just busy schedules.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. The other one that I'd like to ask, Madam Chair, is to Mr. Robert. Some of the existing mechanisms that we have, for example, there's pairing of MP voting, there's the potential for proxy votes, the potential for applied votes as well. The issue of hardware and software, what would be necessary to ensure the integrity of remote voting, and what cost, financial cost, would we be looking at other than the normal mechanisms that exist to develop or create that type of technology?
Well, thank you for the question. That's a good question, actually. In regards to the cost, I think I will go in the reverse order. So in regards to the cost, I think it could be kept to the minimum if we play the cards of redundancy, where we have, 2 or 3 mechanisms of voting and making sure a vote makes it through and is reliable. This way we can use less costly solution. And even if we look, let's say Eastern European countries have SIM cards in their cell phone that they use for actually signing transactions or documents or things like that. They're effectively really cheap. And then the cost of implementation is relatively cheap as well. So I don't foresee technologically for voting, I think it's fairly inexpensive to implement and very efficient.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Morden. Mr. Morden, you talked in terms of radical adaptation in radical times. I think that's what you said in your presentation. We can all agree that these are not normal times, but we have heard earlier evidence, and perhaps you followed this from Great Britain, where the time to look at these types of changes is not at the height of a crisis, but afterwards. Would you agree that under normal circumstances would be the time to look at the potential changes that Parliament might enact in order to deal with future crisis?
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Is it a yes or no answer? Can you answer with a yes or no?
I'm not sure. I guess the answer is no. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Next, we have Dr. Duncan, please. Unmute, please. and we'll begin the time again. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You think I'd be used to this by now. Good morning to all our witnesses. Thank you for coming and for your tremendous expertise. And I just start by saying democracy does not have to stop in the face of a crisis. We can rise to this challenge and we can evolve during this unprecedented time. And I think we have been evolving. I have a limited amount of time for questions. So these first few questions, I'm going to be looking for yes or no answers. I'll begin with Mr. Morden, if I may. Do you believe it's possible for members of Parliament to regularly attend Parliament in person right now with travel restrictions, health vulnerability, or concerns that they're returning from Ottawa will expose constituents in vulnerable areas? That's a yes or no, please.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Morden, do you believe that all members should be empowered through remote voting? Yes or no, please.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Morden. Again, this time to Dr. Essex, if I may. Did you and Dr. Goodman argue in policy options on March 25th that online voting is entirely possible for MPs? And that's yes or no, please.
Well, I believe that was the title of the article, yes.
Thank you. Dr. Essex, did you write in the same article that parliamentary voting is entirely workable from a cybersecurity perspective? Yes or no, please.
Under the right conditions and careful design, yes.
Thank you. Dr. Goodman, you've spoken about this today. Did you write that it is possible to verify an MP's vote online?
Yes, with the right security software, yes.
Thank you. Dr. Goodman, did you write that the federal government has the resources to provide MPs with the necessary cybersecurity infrastructure to ensure the protection of electronic information? Again, that's a yes or no, please.
Yes, I believe with outside consultation with experts who have done this before.
Thank you so much. Dr. Goodman, did you write that the government has the capacity to provide MPs training on procedures necessary to ensure votes are successfully entered into the record? Yes or no, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Dr. Goodman, do you advocate for an online voting system premised on MPs verifying their vote selections? Yes or no?
Upon reflection, I think video voting would work best. And so I would put the verification to, double verified parties within the legislature. Yes.
That's helpful. Thank you. Do you advocate for secure infrastructure that includes a government secured device, application, and network connection?
Yes, that would be for more for application or web-based voting, but obviously we would need infrastructure to facilitate the video voting.
Thank you. Could I ask, you talked about the positives of video voting, what the positives might be for application or web-based voting, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Dr. Essex might be good to chime in here, but I know that with web-based and application-based, for example, it's more easy to capture intent, can be clearer, but there are other issues. And I think in terms of security, it would be email at the bottom, web-based, application-based, but I think Dr. Essex should probably speak to that.
Okay, and what I asked for, thank you, is you've talked about the positives for video voting. I'd like to hear what the positives are for web or application, or you talked about 4 methods, sorry.
Yeah. So the positives for, the big positive for application and web is, I think, intent. It's also, they can be very user-friendly. It depends how they're designed. They work very well, in Estonia, for example, in Switzerland, they have worked well, but there are additional cybersecurity challenges.
I think that's my time, Madam Chair.
Yes,
thank you to the witnesses.
Thank you for monitoring that. Mr. Doherty, you've got 5 minutes, Mr. Doherty.
I'll give my time to Mr. Reid, please.
Okay, absolutely. Mr. Reid, 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much. I have a little timer here, which I'm going to start. There we go, so that I don't run over. And thank you to my colleague, Mr. Doherty, for being so gracious and letting me ask this time. I just wanted to start with a separate question relating to proxy voting. I haven't heard anybody speaking in favor of it. I wonder if we could just go around the witnesses and maybe just quickly signal whether you are opposed to proxy voting or in favor of it. I'm not sure to start with. Why don't we start with Ms. Goodman, seeing as you're the person top on my screen?
Thank you for the question from the member. I am not opposed to proxy voting. However, after some consideration and reviewing remote electronic voting and proxy voting, I do feel that the remote electronic voting enables representation and inclusiveness more fully. Thank you.
Thank you. How about Dr. Essex?
Yeah, so proxy, thank you for the question. Proxy voting in a general election has a lot of problems. I know that they allowed it in Toronto and there were instances of abuse. I don't think that that would be as easy to abuse in a legislative context where the voting would sort of be along, in many cases, along party lines.
Sorry, just to interrupt there. Thank you for that. But that does imply what you just said, that the MP is simply a functionary of the party and not someone who might vote independently. That's what you just effectively asserted. Look, I was setting you guys up. Here's the question I wanted to ask. Isn't it the case that when you deal with, Mr. Essex, I'll ask you to come back to you in a second, but that's a concern I have. A second concern is, what about votes that occur without advance notice, so the MP cannot, even in theory, express their views to the proxy voter who's voting on their behalf? And sorry, now, Mr. Essex, if you can carry on with your response. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not implying that an MP is a function of a party. I'm also not I'm a cybersecurity expert. I am aware of the notion of a whipped vote, which in that case would imply that there would be sort of an understanding ahead of time how members would vote. But setting that aside, in terms of proxy voting, of course, there would need to be time for a member to communicate their intention to their proxy.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Good. Forgive me for imposing something on you that's outside your area of expertise. You just happened to raise the point that got me going. Mr. Morton, can we go to you for this?
Thanks very much for the question. I think I share your concern, if I understand it, in that we see MPs as individuals and as unique representatives of their communities. So we prefer a model like a virtual roll call in which there is that moment of accountability when the member themselves visibly commits their vote.
Thank you. And finally, I think that we only have one more witness, Mr. Roberge. I think that's right.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, from a technical point of view, I don't have a problem with it. I think it's more of a function and problem as the other ones have outlined.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to turn to the issue of roll call or of voting online. I assume it would essentially have to be a roll call vote. We go through one at a time, essentially replicating what we do in the House of Commons. Would that be correct?
Who's the question addressed to?
I'm not sure. Someone who has the right kind of expertise to determine from a technical point of view what is meant by online voting as opposed to app-based voting. Or
thank you for the question. We're distinguishing between a vote that might be input via a web-based interface using a browser in which you sign in on a laptop or a computer versus a application that might be on a smartphone. Right. And so the network connection and the security and so forth is sort of managed slightly differently, the credentials and the law, all that sort of stuff. There's subtle differences. I can tell you all about it if you're interested, but I'll keep it.
No, we only have 30 seconds here. I just wanted to ask this question. How do we deal with someone who is dropped in the middle? Is there some of a vote? Is there some way of getting them back in so they can express their preference? As a way of catching the fact that they were not trying to abstain, but rather were lost partway through the vote? And you can see the technical issue I'm worried about. This can be relevant. Yes. There have been governments, the fall of a government was once decided while I was an MP by one vote. So you want to get these things right.
Yes, absolutely, and I certainly remember that time with these close votes. The issue that you're raising about bandwidth and dropping is actually a bit of a concern, especially if there is a threat actor that has a capability to cause a member's vote to drop at a specific time.
That's all That's all the time we have. I was waiting for a good cut point there.
Thank you to the witness, and thank you to you as well, Ms. Sahota.
Thank you. Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just start by saying that I'm extremely glad to see that some of the witnesses, if not all, have mentioned the fact that this committee has been approaching this as a temporary issue. I think it's safe to say that all members of this committee would rather be meeting in Ottawa and voting in Ottawa, but the reality of the situation is that we are in uncertain times that require us to look for alternatives. And I'm unaware of any member that would like to implement this stuff on a permanent basis. But Ms. Goodwin, Dr. Goodwin?
Goodman.
Goodman. Okay. Yeah. Is it doctor or Ms.?
I have a PhD, but okay. Either is fine.
No, I want to get that right. Dr. Goodman, you seem to be reluctant on doing anything that is web-based or application-based. And I really wanted to understand that a little bit better, because the reality of the situation is that Mr. Essex talked about an example in Sarnia where there was an error with the difference between agree and disagree, and that might work if you have a city council of 15 or 20 people. You can catch that easy. But the reality of the situation is that you have to talk me through how you do a voice vote in a parliament with 338 people that, in our traditional sense, works through the party. So all those in agreement, starting if it's a government piece of legislation, all government members vote. Then any other parties in succession, all those parties members would vote. How do you line that up in the Zoom system so that you have everybody in the line? Like, how does that work? Or when we have 17 to 20 pages of thumbnails of videos, are they just literally jumping back and forth all over the place? Like, how do you practically implement that?
It's a great question. Thank you to the member for the question. I mean, you could go by party, you could go alphabetically.
Right, but sorry to interrupt, but you're not going to be lined up on the screen like that. So if you were to go alphabetically, then you'd be jumping from back and forth on Zoom from screen to screen. And the way Zoom works is that if you interrupt me right now and just say, I agree, the screen won't actually show you as the main image until you've been talking for a few minutes. So I think that there are a lot of technical issues there within the Zoom platform to make the voice vote actually work. Would you agree? At least that there are some challenges?
Absolutely. I would agree that there are challenges. Just considering the voice vote and the show of hands, I more supported this show of hands, but I'd just like to make a quick point on the web and application base.
Okay, I'll let you get to that because I want to ask you a question about that. The way that I look at this, and Mr. Essex, you had said a couple times, Dr. Essex, I got that earlier. Dr. Essex, you had said, notwithstanding deep fake. I think we need to talk about deepfake. I don't think we can say notwithstanding deepfake and put it off to the side, because I think that it is something that is a reality and that can become more of a reality to actually implement. My own personal opinion, when we're talking about authentication, this device, I go to Tim Hortons down the street, I tap the side, my wallet opens, and it won't let me tap the device to pay until it gets my retina and does a facial recognition of me. Would you not agree that, the technology that's built into smartphones, it would be so much more secure in terms of identifying somebody than relying on somebody to say, I agree or disagree or yay or nay? I'll let you, Dr. Goodman or Dr. Essex.
If I could just comment very quickly just on the web versus application based. It's not that I'm opposed to those options. I recognize that, for the UK House of Commons, they built this voting software.
I just really, I need to understand, because I'm running out of time, the difference if you think that, which one you think is more secure. Which has the ability to have more security? Is it the voice vote with the image, or is it the authentication software that's built into these devices?
I can't give a blanket answer to that, because
Mr. Roberge, do you have an answer for that? Being the security expert?
Yeah, definitely. At the moment, I would use video and voice.
Okay.
Over apps.
Because I'll just tell you how I picture it. you are authenticated, you're asked how you want to vote, you confirm how you want to vote, which is all how the UK does it. And then the final step would be an email sent to you saying, this is how you voted. Would that be a secure way of doing it?
No.
No, it would not. Why?
The email is not encrypted end to end.
No. The email is just to email your confirmation of how you voted, to let you know that's your secondary step that you guys talked about.
That's all the time we have. Next up, we've got Madame Normandin.
Thank you very much. I'd like to hear Dr. Essex. You mentioned earlier that it's important to have some way to detect when things go wrong, but it's even more important to put that in practice. In that regard, I'd like to know, would it be a good idea that before the result of a vote is announced, the IT system should certify and give out a message that there was no cyber attack and so on, and after that, the result of the vote is announced?
So there are a number of ways that you could go about it. These would be procedural matters, but the core procedure that needs to be in place is that there needs to be something to handle when somebody doesn't have an opportunity to vote because of some kind of network issue. You know, the website goes down, you need to be able to recover from that. So you need a procedure for that. And if it is detected that a member's vote was changed, you know, by accident, error, or otherwise, there needs to be a method to recover from that. So it certainly seems that you may want to have at least some kind of like tiered, some sort of staged announcement of the vote outcome, sort of a preliminary and then final vote. You can be optimistic about it and announce a preliminary result subject to you know, whatever the CSE or whatever IT security might want to apply to it afterwards.
Merci. Rapidement, parce que j'ai peu de temps.
Okay, quickly, because I don't have much time. Mr. Roberge, is this something that can be done quite quickly, obtain a security certificate? I'm not sure I understand. Could the technical team of the House of Commons say there have not been any cyber attacks or any problems during a vote? I don't think there's such a certificate, but you could have some level of certainty. If I have time, very quickly, Mr. Morton, is it important to you that there be some time between the vote, the announcement of a vote, and the timing of the vote, so that members can discuss this among themselves? Because it's never black or white. There's the whip that has to intervene in a democratic process.
Question.
10 seconds.
Yes, I think time and predictability should be primary first order principles of a virtual parliament.
Thank you. Ms. Blaney, please.
So I guess I would like to come to Dr. Essex. You were going to answer Mr. Gerritson's question, and I'm really curious about your response.
Thank you for the question. May I ask which of the many questions that I...
Well, just at the end, he talked about the process that he saw outlining in the email verification, and you said there was concerns about that. I'm just wondering if you could clarify what those concerns would be.
Concerns about email verification
for the vote.
Well, you know, there has to be some avenue to verify or you know, identify that a vote was correctly recorded. That could be via a website or some other channel. The issue that we just have with email is just that it's not encrypted end to end. I mean, it's not a suitable technology for this purpose.
Thank you. Mr. Roberge, you talked or you were asked the question about what method is the best. I'm going back to Mr. Gerritson's questions again, but what is the best method for transparency in terms of voting? And you said on the screen, yay or nay. And I'm just wondering if you could speak about why that is the most secure and any concerns that you may have about using a smartphone, for example, to vote in Parliament.
Okay, yeah, I think first, just to clarify, Mr. Gerritsen's question was, he was asking if the way the UK Parliament's doing it at the moment is actually pretty good, which I find the way he described it, I'm not familiar with it, sounded good. In the way where you vote in person, not in person, video, and then there's a validation through email. That's what I understood from it. But that sounds like a pretty decent and probably one of the best and easiest implementation we can do at the moment. And the reason is even though deepfake is on the table, it's still one of the hardest attacks to pull at the moment versus applications or just some data in a database. So those are two different worlds of attacks. So that's why I think voting with video confirmation and then confirm with another method, either email or application, has a high value.
Thank you. I believe that's my time.
Thank you, Ms. Blaney, and thank you to all of our witnesses today. Very insightful information, the professors and both of the organizations that have come before us today. Thank you. We are very grateful. I think this panel has really gotten us down to the core of what we are trying to study in this study. So it was extremely, extremely helpful for us putting together the report. We will take about 5 minutes or so to clear out these witnesses and then bring in our new witnesses and do sound checks for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before us today, we have academics, and it's really great. Even in the previous panel, we got a lot of valuable information from the professors that had come before us. So we've got Mr. Gorbani, Professor and Director at the Canadian Institute of Cybersecurity, University of New Brunswick. We've got Mr. Jourdan. Is that a correct pronunciation?
Yes.
Mr. Jourdan?
Jourdan.
Okay. Jourdan, Professor of Computer Science, Faculty of Engineering at the University of Ottawa. Welcome. And then we've got we've got Chris Vickery, Director of Cyber Risk Research at UpGuard. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll start with a 7-minute opening statements from all of the witnesses, starting with Dr. Gorbani, please. Dr. Gorbani, please unmute your mic. And you have 7 minutes to make an opening statement. Your mic is still muted.
All right.
There we go.
Okay.
We can hear you perfectly now. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, honorable members of the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Thank you for inviting the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity at the University of New Brunswick to speak today about cybersecurity considerations relating to the establishment of a hybrid parliament. My name is Ali Gorbani. I'm a professor of computer science, a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Cybersecurity, and founder and director of the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity. Cybersecurity and privacy, once issues only for technology experts, have become widespread concerns in business and society. Cybersecurity is no longer just an IT problem, it's a business problem, it's everyone's problem. The weakest link in cybersecurity is now people, not devices. As such, we here at the Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity, we think that the human factor is considered the biggest threat to cyber safety, and we strongly believe that cybersecurity requires multidisciplinary and human-centric solutions. The Canadian Institute for Cybersecurity is one of the first institutions to bring together researchers from across the academic spectrum to share innovative ideas and carry out groundbreaking research into the most pressing cybersecurity challenges of our time. We have been doing research and development and entrepreneurial activities in this area non-stop for over 2 decades and have developed multiple practical network security solutions, and our research has led to establishment of several companies. Currently, the Institute has a team of 60 researchers, technical staff, and graduate students, and a state-of-the-art architecture and infrastructure. The science of cybersecurity is about managing risks and avoiding surprises. There will be security risks with any online communication platforms. In the Virtual Chambers report of May 11, 2020, it is written members who wish to participate remotely will connect using a video conferencing platform integrated into existing on-premise technologies. Let me briefly highlight the security and privacy issues in relation to the proposed platform from 2 perspectives, users and organizers. On the user side, the first issue is awareness of cybersecurity. The remote participant who use the platform for virtual seating must be aware of the security risk associated with the use of online video conferencing platforms, or if not, must be trained for such. The goal is to avoid issues such as installing platform software from an unofficial site, which can be malware, phishing a scam asking to join a video conference which steals credentials, overprivileged video conferencing application by using web version which sits in a sandbox in the browser when possible, instead of installing an application. The second issue is technical issues for remote access. The remote participants who use the platform for virtual sitting must have satisfactory assets for remote access, and if not, must be provided for such. The goal is to avoid issues such as hardware shutdown during connection due to power outage, which can be considered as availability issue. A slow connection and breaking during meeting, which can be considered as availability and integrity issue. Vulnerable webcam, which can be accessed to unauthorized users, which can be considered as confidentiality and privacy issues. On the organizer side, the first issue is trusted computing based on trusted hardware. Considering the proposed integration of multimedia system with a video conferencing and voting system, it is known that a system is as secure as its weakest link. Furthermore, computing hardware has security issues such as branch direction prediction attacked by Spectre Variant 1. Therefore, it raises the need to use trusted hardware such as Trusted Platform Module TPM, also known as ISO IEC 11889, which is dedicated microcontroller designed to secure hardware to integrated cryptographic keys. The second issue is verifiable software. The software integrated to the virtual chamber must be verified, or if not, it must be open source, such as Helios for online election system, or openly reviewed, such as Zoom proposal for end-to-end encryption for video conferencing. The goal is to avoid software vulnerabilities such as meeting bombing, which an unauthorized person joins a meeting, client application chat issues, malicious links, and arbitrary file write. Security risks related to operating systems of the video conferencing platform and user management system. And last but not least, the third issue in is secured cloud and networking technologies. The network integrated to the virtual chamber must be private, or if not, it must be secured. The goal is to avoid cloud and network vulnerabilities such as security risk related to or with streaming videos such as stream grabbing and uploading. Security risk related with data routing such as route manipulation and route hijacking, which requires that platform integrated must offer the ability to choose through which region of the world the data would be routed. With that, thank you again for inviting me to be with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Gurbani. Next, we've got Mr. Jourdan.
Merci. Madame la Présidente, Mesdames et Messieurs les membres du comité, je vous remercie de m'avoir invité à prendre la parole devant vous ici.
Having invited me to take part in this meeting, my name is Guy Vincent Jourdan. I'm a professor of computer science at the engineering faculty of the University of Ottawa. My research subjects include software security and cybersecurity. I've worked particularly in cybercrime and cybersecurity cooperation with IBM. Can we put in place, in a safe way, a parliamentary hybrid system in Canada, including remote electronic voting on the basis of the report produced in May entitled Virtual Sittings of the House? It seems to me that the answer is yes, provided we have the means. It's very difficult to be very specific without a preliminary study in depth and whose conclusions would not be explainable in 7 minutes, but here are a few important points. With regard to your parliamentary debates and discussions, there are several key elements that facilitate things. We have a parliament and existing infrastructure for security that is high-performing and good personnel on which we can count. Securing communications between members, secure infrastructure, control of devices used remotely, and software installed on devices, that has all existed for a long time now. And then the situation we are facing today is a global one, and needs are similar worldwide. For example, Brazil, Spain, the UK, Wales, the European Parliament have all established virtual parliaments, some with remote electronic voting. So it can be done. But we can also benefit from experiences worldwide. The idea of virtual sittings and remote voting perhaps is very new for many parliaments and governments, but we mustn't forget that these systems have been used often by the private sector and for a long time to hold private meetings, confidential meetings, boards of directors, or voting by their shareholders. Video conference software has been analyzed for security for a long time. The NSA has maintained a document listing important points on the selection and use of software, such as end-to-end digitization, multi-factor authentication, or the use of certified and controlled of devices. A certain number of solutions have been evaluated in a positive way, such as solutions by Microsoft or Cisco, or the Zoom software, for example. The question can't be summed up by the selection of a video software. You have to call the vote, you have to have confidence in the result of the vote. You have to respect the rules and adapt them as need be. I think that the internet vote is another matter. The informatics community is not in favor of it. The challenges are too great and the risks are too high. The benefits are doubtful. But we have to look at what we're talking about. A parliamentary vote is not the same as a general internet vote. For example, there are fundamental differences. This is public, which facilitates the problem. The result is widely broadcast, and anyone can ensure how the votes have been counted. The number of people voting is restricted, and every member is well known. The devices on which the votes take place are controlled and managed by the technical staff in Parliament. One can imagine that an accredited video conference system, a secure communication system, and a voting system may be integrated in any of these systems, but not necessarily. In the normal proceeding, the member is called upon to vote through a secure communication, and there is a biometric authentication that takes place, and many acknowledgements are published immediately. So procedures are put in place to manage an abnormal situation, such as loss of connectivity or manipulation errors. To maximize success, one must ensure that the devices that are used are managed and controlled by the technical team, that are audited, certified, up to date, and secure, etc. According to my understanding, that's already the case. We have to make sure that the software used comes from a certified supply chain, that it has been audited by independent teams and continue to be so regularly, that they get adequate certification such as FIPS 140, and that they're kept up to date. According to my knowledge, that is also the case right now. These systems have to integrate in the existing infrastructure of Parliament, the multi-factor authentication mechanisms of virtual private network and intranet, the cloud of the architecture of the cloud, and so on. Logs can be produced and kept in a secure manner at all levels to respond and remedy any problem or perceived problem. Clear and effective procedures must be put in place to define the procedure in case of a problem and ensure that the sitting can continue. There should be independent specialists from the private sector or academia. All this means that a solution will be made public. None of this is beyond our reach. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Vickery.
Hello, thank you for inviting me to give my thoughts and answer questions today on this very important and very interesting time that we are in. The solution that I have worked out, I believe, is minimal on effort required and maximal on trust. I think that with a parliament-style vote where there are only a few hundred people, it is definitely possible to be absolutely confident in the result that is shown, and here is how you do it. I am not in favor of web app-based solutions or video voting or things that require a phone display, primarily because those things can be programmed to lie and display things that are not true to both sides. It's just something that is not going to be overcome anytime soon. And even if the implementation is secure and safe, the fact is people that use their phones for other things are going to be continually taken advantage of in the general public, and we're going to see report after report in the general sense about phones being insecure. That will degrade the integrity of these official votes that are being done through phones, even if they're being done in a secure way. So that is something that is also not going to be overcome. What I would suggest as a solution involves a separate physical piece of hardware that is plugged in, requires no training whatsoever. I've got an example of one right here that you plug in with the regular Ethernet to any member's home, whatever, and it is set with software that already exists to transmit but not receive. So the benefits of this are that an adversary would have to know the precise window of time that the vote is happening. They would have to compromise the ISP transmission. They would have to have the decryption capability already figured out and the preloaded key known in advance. And they would have to be able to change or modify the packet that is sent instantaneously. And that can be checked because there are timestamps on the transmissions. You can calculate how long it took for a transmission to go from a member's location to the receiving official place of the vote being received. And through math and logic and physics, we can figure out, hey, was it physically possible that it made it that quickly, or was that transmission unreasonably slow, which would suggest that it had been intercepted, modified, repackaged, and sent. You can get an average heartbeat signal going, and as long as it arrives within that specific time frame and reasonability, you can be fairly secure or fairly sure of the result. The important other factor is a secondary outside band confirmation. I would suggest that you then have the member on their telephone call a specific line and verify or validate or confirm what their vote is. So anybody trying to alter a vote or manipulate things would have to have all that previous knowledge and be able to instantaneously change something in a way that requires calculation and time. And they would also have to compromise the phone carrier and impersonate the member at the exact window of voting on that confirmation call. All of this requires zero training on the part of the voting member. It is maximally logically verifiable, and it is minimal on cost, and the technology already exists to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vickery. We're going to head into the question portion of the panel, and we're going to begin with, actually, I don't know from the Conservative side, I don't believe I got a name for this round.
Broussard, Madam Chair.
Mr. Broussard. Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Broussard, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you to all the panelists today. Very interesting information. I want to get your opinion on the Zoom platform. Parliament has gone all in, as a lot of other businesses have, with this particular platform, and as it relates to not just voting, but overall security of the platform. We're hearing today in a story from the Associated Press about censorship issues for China. Now, in the previous study we did, we were told that a lot of the data transmits through servers in Vancouver and Toronto, at least for business that's done in Canada, but there's seemingly no guarantee that that can happen. And when the company was asked about what happened with respect to Hong Kong, it refused comments on that. So I'm just, Mr. Vickery, I'll start with you. Just overall, the Zoom platform and your confidence. Obviously, a G7 country is a valuable target for state actors and non-state actors as well. And so I'm just interested in your comments on the Zoom platform.
These comments are good for any similar commercial offering, not necessarily specific to Zoom, but would count for Zoom. I would not do anything secret over Zoom or any other similar platform. you cannot be certain that there are not going to be adversaries listening or intercepting or even changing packets and communications, because you don't know who is the third-party contractor who may have access either overtly or covertly to something that widespread. It is just not trustworthy for anything of a high security nature.
Mr. Gorbani, do you have comments in regards to that? You gotta hit the mute button. There you go.
And there we go.
All right. So I'll say similar that Zoom is not unique in terms of security flaws. Any video conferencing platforms would have issues. Zoom became famous with Zoom bombing and etc. that happened recently, but they at least have openly reviewed the proposal for end-to-end encryption that would be sufficient for at least integrity of the data moving between the two ends. But in the end, I think your guess is as good as anyone else's. You could say Microsoft Teams has better security. At least they publicize it as such, that it has better security and appears to have good security in place. But all in all, I think they all go in the same group as being vulnerable to any third-party type of attacks, networking, etc. that could actually. But I did mention it at the end of my 7 minutes opening that the routing is important. The routing of the data is awfully important, and definitely Parliament should make sure that how the data is routed from which direction. Which part of the world the data actually end up being traveling through. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Gorbani. Mr. Vickery, a couple of points I'd like to make. I'm very interested in the separate physical piece of hardware component that you spoke about. I'm interested in how you see that potentially working. But I also want to bring you back to 2018. You said about the idea of phone and internet elections, and I quote when you were before the ethics committee, stay away from that, use paper ballots with audit trails. As long as you're using paper ballots with audit trails, you're relatively on the right track, end quote. Do you still stand by that view? And would your concern also extend to legislative voting in Parliament as well? So 2 points there I'd like you to address.
I absolutely still stand by that statement. The context was in a nationwide, millions of people involved type of election. If you're dealing with 200, 300 elected officials, it is feasible to have them vote and confirm those votes and do so in a secure enough way that you can be confident in the result being accurate. It is much different when you're doing it with millions of private citizens.
So on the issue of the separate physical piece of hardware that you referred to, is that what type of hardware would you be using? Would it involve an application? What's the potential cost? I assume that it's in development somewhere, but what would be the actual cost to implement that type of program? Just if you can just expand further on that, please.
Well, this little thing right here is actually kind of outdated. That's what I'm using as an example. It's a packet squirrel. It is like $30 commercial to buy one of them. I'm sure you could get a whole bunch of them at a bulk rate. They are sold online, and I have no financial ties to it. I don't stand to benefit whatsoever from saying this. Basically, it is a network tap type device where you just plug it in and it is connected to the network. It has software that runs on it that is configurable by you. You can set it to only communicate with one specific IP address and set it to communicate in a way that it does not receive commands, only sends them.
Okay, now the other issue that you spoke about as well is the delay in a response to the actual vote. Can you provide a clearer? Sorry, Madam.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Did you want to just get out the rest of your question? Maybe it could be responded to later.
Just as far as the delay is concerned, thank you, Madam Chair. As far as the delay is concerned, how could that be measured, and what could our security team, our IT team on the Parliament side, how could they, what examples would they be looking for more specifically when it did come back to them? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maybe one of your colleagues can pick that up as well.
Perhaps.
Mr. Turnbull?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses. I really appreciate the expertise that you bring to this panel. Just want to start by mentioning the two, Dr. Essex and Dr. Goodman, that we had in this morning's panel. They really made a very clear distinction between general election online voting and parliamentary online voting. And they pointed to the fact that parliamentary voting, online voting, is a matter of public record. It really relies on the federal government's cybersecurity infrastructure and the capacity that our federal government has for training MPs. So, Mr. Gorbani, I know you mentioned in your opening remarks that that people are actually the weakest link, and you stress the importance of training MPs in any sort of online or virtual proceeding, and so that people are aware of the risks. Do you want to say further about how we should do that moving forward, assuming we move forward with some form of online voting?
Well, first, I think the issue of awareness has to be a continuous agenda within the Parliament to make sure that every so often the new issues and problems come in, the members are being aware and trained about it. So it's not a one-time training and we're done with it. And secondly, I would sort of disagree to some extent that it really doesn't matter between the general election and the parliamentary election when it comes to online voting. Two main issues of online voting is verifiability and availability, or in other words, you don't end up having a case where people cannot vote, or you can want to verify their vote, which was mentioned also that maybe a phone call after should be used to verify it. So the size is not important here, is more of a, you want to make sure that the vote is done properly and verifiable in the end. But again, I want to go emphasize on your point. I'm a big proponent of awareness issue or program within different departments in the government, and the Parliament would be no different.
Thank you. And Mr. Jourdain, you outlined quite an important list, I think, of points. I tried to write them all down. I'm not sure if I got them all, but it sounded like you were very firmly in the camp that says that this online voting is doable based on what you know of much of the IT infrastructure, the cybersecurity infrastructure that we have currently. Would you say that that's true?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Would you be willing to table with this committee an outline of those specific points that you made? Because I didn't quite get them all down, but it really seemed to resonate with the things we heard from our cybersecurity folks at the House of Commons. So I would really value your your points. If you'd be willing to submit those, would you be willing to do that?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I want to talk about procedural safeguards. I know there's technological and procedural safeguards. We've heard about, ensuring that members would verify their votes and in multiple ways potentially, and that we have a plan. There certainly seems to be importance placed by many cybersecurity experts in having a plan for what goes wrong, or when something goes wrong, that we know what to do. Mr. Vickery, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, a way to mitigate the risk of, a catastrophic event and single points of failure is to intertwine competing platforms within it. Meaning, if you are sending a vote over the internet, have it go to not only one cloud routing center before it gets to the official site, send it also a mirrored exact duplicate to the competing next company that is fighting with the first company for revenue, and have them receive it and perhaps hold it, or even transmit it or let it be viewable to the receiving side. And if they don't match, you got problems. They should match. neither one of these companies wants to be known as the company that was compromised in votes for change. They have a defined interest and a competitive interest in being correct, accurate, and as ethical and well regarded as possible, because otherwise the competitor is going to eat their lunch.
Great. Mr. Gorbani, do you have any thoughts on procedural or technological safeguards specific to online voting?
I would like to second what was said, that in order to make sure that we do have a secure and verifiable and also available system, we need to work on basically diversity. You could end up having two systems mirroring each other. So if one goes down, the other one actually can hold on. So diversity would be a core in terms of making sure that you have everything available at any time for voting to go on.
Thank you. We've also heard the importance of simplicity in the design of the device or interface or program, software, etc., that's being used for this in the future. Mr. Jourdain, I wonder if you could comment on sort of usability, considering the amount of human error that can occur.
Well, yes, obviously,
Unfortunately, Mr. Jourdain, that's all the time we have, unless you have a quick yes or no type response, but I don't think for this question you might be able to.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Madame Normandin.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our entire panel. Your comments have been extremely interesting. I have a question for Dr. Jourdain. You talked about voting systems used in the private sector for shareholder voting, for example. We discussed the possibility or even need of having some part of the voting process be visual or at least vocal. In your view or to your knowledge, does any system in the private sector include that sort of component? And if so, to what extent? Yes, some companies just use Zoom, and each of the voters votes on video. Are there systems, to your knowledge, where you can record your visual answer and have it sent without using a system like Zoom where we would vote sequentially? I don't know if such a system exists, but we could certainly establish one or set one up, build one. Thank you. As an adjunct to the question by my colleague, Mr. Turnbull, on the list, I've seen that the NSC provides a list of criteria that makes it possible to determine whether one system is more suitable than another for certain uses. I would like to know whether you can provide that document as well. Yes, I'd be happy to. It is in English. You said it was also important to maintain a log of problems coming up with a system, and that a contingency plan was necessary. You also said that the House of Commons had resources. To your knowledge, are the House of Commons resources at present sufficient to establish a contingency plan and keep a log of any problems that might arise? Well, it's difficult for me to answer that question. I know that you have a very good foundation. Now, do you need to hire more people? I can't really say. But you do have the infrastructure, if I understand correctly. The ability to keep logs is there as well. There's nothing difficult in that. Do you need more staff? I would not be surprised, but it's not for me to say. I don't think you would need many because you already have a pretty good contingent. I have a question from Mr. Vickery. We talked about the visual portion of an online vote, and this is something that would be very interesting to members. There's also the unidirectional communication system you showed us, would that make it possible to send a recording of a visual vote? And in such a case, would it protect against problems like deep-faked videos that could be sent?
The answer is used to send. However, I would advise against relying on a visual or video type of vote. You are going to have problems as technology advances with abilities to forge and manipulate those types of things. It is a losing battle, and it is not future proof.
Est-ce que ça peut, par contre...
However, can it be twinned with something? Can we have more than one method of validating a vote, including a visual vote?
Yes, that is actually a very good idea, and it could be used as a layer on top. And that would also deter bad actors, because if something shows up anomalously, you're going to know where to start investigating.
Merci beaucoup. Peut-être rapidement.
Thank you very much. A quick question for Dr. Gorbani. You talked about the human factor as being the main fear here. Could you specify in what way the human factor can be particularly critical in terms of a vote, an electronic vote?
So fundamentally, it's probably will be a case where the person does not use a proper equipment or system and software that a third party can get in between, and data, the transit could be altered or changed, etc. So that's how I can see from the human perspective that makes make error in order to allow a vote to be altered and changed. It also make a good understanding from the perspective of a person to be educated about encryption and how from her end data can be encrypted and sent to the other end, so data, the transit will not be altered or changed or grabbed. So that's how I see it from the human perspective, error that could be made.
Merci beaucoup. Madame la Présidente.
I think that's all the time I have, Madam Chair.
No, maybe a little less, actually. Okay, next up, Ms. Blaney, please.
Hello, and I want to thank all the panelists for being here with us today as we discuss this very important matter. So the first question I would like to bring to Mr. Jourdan. So we are hearing from some of our witnesses today, but we've also heard in our last report that the security of virtual parliament operations is not purely technological. There are human considerations that need to be accounted for. Do you think members and staff should be involved in the development of a remote voting solution? And what kind of training and protocols need to be in place for the human element of remote electronic voting to be done safely and securely?
Yes, thank you. Very good question. And yes, absolutely. I mean, I come to this debate as a technologist, so I have the technology point of view, but there is absolutely no question that a good system is going to involve non-technical people and end users in the first place. So yes, I absolutely agree that this is not something that should be done just by IT folks.
Thank you.
Yes.
If you have more, please add. Sorry, I thought you were done.
No, I was just saying, yes, in terms of training, I think it's, of course, fundamental to have, regular training updates. Such a system is going to be, we uncover problems all the time. And so a system like that will have to be agile. We will have to be able to update it regularly. And that means people will have to be retrained constantly, and that has to be taken into account. That should be part of the plan.
I couldn't agree more. Mr. Gorbani, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think what is important to recognize here that when we're talking about training, it's not that IT people are always being trained or be in front of the people to train them. We need to bring all sort of expertise into the conversation. So group from business, law, education, and humanities, sociology and psychology, they are all important elements when we're talking about awareness program in cyberspace. So if that all, there is a training program and it's going to be ongoing kind of program, you want to involve these kind of expertise to be as part of developing the contents and delivering the awareness program.
Well, and one of the concerns that I've had through this process, of course, we have a very large country and connectivity in some of our ridings is a concern. And I think addressing that issue is really important. And part of having all MPs participate, especially those of us who are in more remote ridings, simply makes sense because we'll be able to identify any gaps. I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions on who we need to include and if all MPs should be included in the process.
To my, if you're asking me, all MPs should be included in this process. And I think a couple of years ago, we were in front of few MPs to show them how easily they can be attacked or hacked by their phone or their laptops. So it's important that all MPs get the training and also continuously getting the training. As we know, we're continuously getting new type of attacks, new type of phishing, new ways of manipulating and spoofing, etc. So it's important to have everyone involved.
Thank you. So, Mr. Kobani, I'm going to ask this question of you and then Mr. Jourdain after. Comparing the digital security of different methods of recorded or roll call votes, how would you compare video voting through a video conference platform to remote electronic voting on a House of Commons managed device? Are they both safe?
To me, they are as safe as they could be right now. As I said, they are safe. The only thing that I'm concerned is the verifiability issue. That there has to be a plan in place by the House in order to verify the total tally and the details of the tally, and also the availability issue. You just mentioned that there are many who are in different ridings who may not have good connectivity, and a small scale denial of service attack could actually easily prevent people from voting. So both technologies do suffer from both items that I mentioned, verifiability and availability.
Mr. Jourdain, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, I would like to go back to your point of bandwidth. I think there is one difference between those two approaches, and it is that in the system we are talking about, with a dedicated messaging system, a dedicated voting system, and a dedicated video conference system, the one that is hungry in bandwidth is the video system. And so I would be a bit worried about putting, the vote part onto that, because that's the one that's most likely to break if you have poor bandwidth. I would also echo my colleagues' comments regarding the availability in terms of security. If I have to identify what would be the topmost concern to me, because of the context of this vote here, I think availability would be the topmost concern. It would be quite difficult to change someone's vote so that no one's see that, but it would be probably easier to prevent voting in the first place. And so that would be probably a good place to focus attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jourdain. Next, we have from the Conservatives, who do we have? Thank you, Mr. Garnett. How do you pronounce your last name? Because still hear it pronounced a couple of different ways.
Jenis typically. It's an unfortunate anglicization, right? From what the original Maltese was, but Jenis is what we typically say. Yeah.
Jenis, okay, because that's what I used, but then I heard your own colleagues pronounce it differently, so I was like, maybe I'm off.
Genoese is the original Maltese. I hope that doesn't cut into my time. I can explain the origin of my last name.
No, that's fine.
Next time we have one of the longer sessions which we have from time to time in PROC, I will
absolutely
go into detail on that.
Okay, Mr. Jenis, 5 minutes,
okay, please. I'll be briefer than usual. Mr. Vickery, interesting your discussion of kind of how a method would work for voting that would be secure, but of course here we're concerned about two possible kinds of vulnerability. One would be the issue of foreign interference, hacking, and it seems like you've explained how that risk is mitigated with the method that you've proposed. But there's another kind of risk, which is MPs effectively giving up what is supposed to be their responsibility for voting, where they might hand over the device that you've discussed to a member of their staff, a member of the whip staff. They might say, I'm going on vacation for the next couple of days, just vote the party line. This sort of thing would be theoretically involving the active cooperation of the member, but it would still be something that would be very inappropriate. We'd want to make sure that there was a system to prevent that from happening, because it's the responsibility of members to vote, to be seen to vote, and to vote themselves, whatever influences they're taking into consideration. So does your proposed method of a prescribed piece of technology, does it do anything to address that possible risk of someone giving the device to somebody else to vote for them, forwarding email codes, those kinds of things?
Absolutely. In order to have that happen, the proxy person or whoever would have to physically be in the residence in order to have the IP address that it is sent from and known ahead of time to be received from. That validates, at least from a physical perspective, where that IP address is located is at their home. And then to have them confirm via a phone call within a specific window of time using their own voice, their phone number. Their phone number can theoretically be spoofed, but that's kind of illegal, I would assume, in Canada, as it is in the US. So you not only have voice, phone number, and specific IP address, you can add in other identifiers that are specific and unique.
Okay, so just so I understand that, you're saying, basically the only way to go forward with this is to have those multiple levels of redundancy. So you have the direct piece of technology that has to be tied to a location, as well as some kind of voice verification. All of those levels of kind of checking would be necessary to achieve the result that you're talking about.
I would summarize it as a second band of confirmation, some sort of out of original network, non-connected secondary confirmation method.
Okay. It's just interesting because, we're already doing some of this, and like we have supposedly in-camera meetings that have happened of PROC on the Zoom platform with nothing resembling that level of background here. So it seems that based on your testimony, the systems that we have in place are so far behind in terms of essentially assuming that we can just use Zoom and call it in camera and everything would be fine.
It may work, but over time it will head south as far as integrity and belief in the system goes. It will only degrade.
Okay. Could you just speak as well to, some people out there might be wondering, is this actually really a concern that people want to interfere with these kinds of meetings? And it's worth members looking at, the 2019 report of the Intelligence Review Committee of Parliamentarians, which shows that there are major growing issues of foreign state interference, and that Canada is frankly way behind on being aware of and responding and coordinating to these issues. So could you just maybe underline, is it a realistic concern that there are actors, foreign states, trying to interfere in our democracy, that would have an interest in identifying these security vulnerabilities and in exploiting them?
Absolutely. I steadfastly believe there is an undeclared world war practically occurring as we speak against democracy and everything that it stands for. So yes, there are lots of people, both for profit and for political ideology purposes around the world, actively 24 hours a day trying to cause harm to Canada, yes, as well as others.
And you talked about how those vulnerabilities exist on multiple different platforms, but is it a particular concern that we're using right now a platform that is that is under the potential influence of the Chinese government? What we've seen in terms of backdoors for technology with Huawei. There was a situation where the Chinese government built a building for the African Union that was found to be full of listening devices. I mean, there's so many different cases of influence. Is this a particular concern for you that you think we should be sensitive to?
We're over time. Next up, we have Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And I also would like to take an opportunity to thank our witnesses that are with us today, and a special greeting to Mr. Dr. Garbani, who is a fellow New Brunswicker as well. So wanted to give a special shout out to a fellow New Brunswicker. First of all, this morning we heard from an esteemed panel group as well, and they spoke to us about the importance of developing a cyber incident response plan in the event that we had a threat that had been identified in an attempt to disrupt or compromise our systems. And I am not an IT expert at all. I'm just wondering if all three of you could provide us with the elements that should be included in a cyber incident response plan to ensure that we can better understand what that would entail. And maybe I'll start with Dr. Garbani.
Very good. Thank you very much. And hello to you from New Brunswick, of course. Yes, the cyber incident response plan is an integral part of any plan that you must have in your organization when it comes to cyberspace and cybersecurity. So that's for sure, but we also have to recognize that we have a fairly advanced group of people and infrastructure within communication security establishment that do provide these kind of service, and they also in charge of Cyber Cert Canada. So a collaboration between the Parliament and CSE would actually make sure that Parliament does have the CERT plan in place for things that might happen as a result of breach in cyberspace.
Thank you. Monsieur Jourdain?
Yes. So I will simply second what Professor Garbani just said. We obviously need that, and we do have in Canada the kind of knowledge to handle this kind of plan, to put together this kind of plan and have the team in place to handle that. I would perhaps simply state the obvious, which is that it's not really related to what we are talking about right now. It has to be in place right now already. Because you guys are already using technology to do all kinds of things. And I think we want to look at the proposal that's on the table today in the context of what we have. We are not really changing, introducing something crazy here compared to what is happening already. So I do expect that plan to be in place right now. And I think we should maintain it and just have it now embrace this new situation.
Merci, Mr. Jourdain. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan.
Yes. The plan that I would have in place, and if you do not, you need to get it in place, is one of mitigate the compromise immediately. Don't necessarily turn everything off because you can lose valuable forensics that way, but segment and mitigate it and have defined roles ahead of time so that people know what their job is in an incident response situation and are not left guessing or checking with somebody else to see if they need to do this or that or the other. And if there is a critical infrastructure involved, communicate with federal level authorities early on, very quickly, to see if you need to do anything to help their investigation. If they are investigating an advanced persistent state actor and you were to turn off systems immediately and lose some valuable forensics, it would be a tragedy. So I would do those things.
Great, thank you. And a very quick question, as I know that I only have about 30 seconds, so perhaps a yes or no answer from all three panelists. We're not looking at creating anything very complicated, or we're looking at moving forward with a voting system with respect to legislative votes that have already been done in public, that are being done publicly, and also looking at a hybrid system where we're debating in Parliament, and again, everything is public, nothing is confidential. Do you feel that we have the technology available to do that securely, Dr. Godbody?
Yes, we do. Verified in the end, but yes, we do.
Mr. Vickery?
Absolutely. It just has to be done correctly.
And Mr. Jourdain?
Yes, I'm saying here. It
Thank you.
has
That's
to be done
all
correctly.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for the Conservatives. Who is up next? Mr. Richards, please go ahead. 5 minutes.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Vickery, Mr. Jennis was asking you a question, and unfortunately time ran out, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to that question. Do you need me to restate it, or do you?
If you could just summarize it again.
Sure, yeah, I can do my best, and Mr. Jennis, feel free to pipe in if you think I've mischaracterized it. But essentially what he was asking you about was the fact that we are using a platform right now that obviously there's a significant amount of control of by a state state-owned with the Chinese involvement.
I recall now.
Wondering if you had any thoughts on whether that's something we should be cautious about and whether you would have concerns about that.
Well, I would not be talking about anything secret on this type of communication because it's a public, open knowledge type of forum. It's probably okay, but I would not transmit anything that needs to be kept confidential over this platform or any other commercial generic offering out there. The Chinese side of things, that is a state level concern. So it is elevated. I wouldn't say that they are the highest level of concern out there, but it is an elevated concern.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Given some of the testimony that we've heard here, some of the responses we've heard today, and also the fact that we and Mr. Broussard, I think, pointed towards a report that we're seeing about some we'll call it rather interesting things that have happened with Zoom. And the fact that some of our members of this committee have tried to get answers to this from the administration previously, as well as from Zoom. I want to move a motion. So I'll read it slowly because then the translation can keep up so that it's in both languages. So the motion would be that the committee order the House of Commons administration to produce no later than Monday, June 15th of 2020, all contracts, master service agreements, licensing agreements, and terms and conditions, including in respect of data collection, use and disclosure of personal information, and third-party contractual arrangements that it has entered into with Zoom Video Communications, Inc., and any of its subsidiaries, affiliates, or agents. So I move that motion, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right. You still have time on your questioning if you'd like to.
Well, I'm recognizing the fact that we don't have a lot of time with these witnesses, and I don't want to use a lot of the time. I would like to see a vote on this motion, so perhaps we could proceed if there's any debate, or proceed with the motion, because I'd like to make sure that we don't steal any more time from witnesses.
Yes. Okay. The clerk would like to. I think maybe Justin, you can just speak to the committee as to how we can proceed.
Yes, hello, Madam Chair. So Mr. Richards just moved a motion. Generally, at this point, it would open the floor up for debate until such time as debate is over, and then the committee can make a decision on the motion that Mr. Richards has just moved. The committee can also decide, if that is the wish of the committee, to continue with the questioning and then come back to Mr. Richards' motion afterwards, if that is acceptable to the committee as well. It's really in the hands of the committee. That would take the consent of the committee to agree to do that. Otherwise, the normal course of things would be, once a motion is moved and proposed, debate would follow, and then followed by a decision once debate is terminated or finished.
Okay, Mr. Gerritsen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very happy to discuss this motion. I wouldn't mind if we could just move to defer it till after we're done with the witnesses. I think we only have 2 or 3 more questions, and we can let the witnesses go, and then we can do this. Is Mr. Richards okay with that?
I'd like to see us proceed just to make sure that we deal with the motion. I was hoping that maybe it could be voted on quickly. I would think this would be something all would agree to, but if
I'm happy to vote on it. To be completely honest, Madam Chair, I don't even have a problem with the motion, but I just wanted to give the opportunity for people to debate about it without holding up our witnesses that are here. So I just thought I would throw that out there.
We do have committee business time, but if the committee wishes to vote on it right now, if there isn't much debate, then maybe then I don't see why that would be an issue, since we won't be holding up the witnesses if we can get to a quick vote. However, if there's lengthy debate, maybe we can save it for committee business time. Mr. Gerritsen?
And June 15th would be Monday of this coming week. Was that the intent? Was that the date you said, Mr. Richards? Sorry, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm just going off what I heard you say.
That's the date I gave. I would think it'd be something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my only concern would be, we're really only giving 1 business day to produce this, and if they can do it, that's great. But I imagine if there's a timeline problem there, they'll let us know. But I'm happy to support the motion, Madam Chair. I think that the more information that we can get, the better.
What was the date? I tried to write down most of the motion, but I didn't get that either.
It's Monday,
okay.
June 15th.
15th. Okay, perfect. Okay. We have some hands raised. Mr. Turnbull and then Mr. Alghabra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I didn't really catch all of Mr. Richard. I know he read it fairly slowly, but maybe my mind was elsewhere at the moment. I really didn't catch the full scope of the motion that Mr. Richards put forward. I wondered if we could either request it in writing or have it read out really slowly again. I'd like to write it down if possible.
Okay, before we go to that, maybe we can hear from Mr. Alghabra, and then we can have Mr. Richards reread the motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question for Mr. Richards. As I'm just trying to understand, I understand the idea behind it, and in principle, I'm supportive of it. I just trying to ask Mr. Richards if he can explain the relationship between the value of the contract and the study that we're trying to do, just so for my own understanding and seeing what the purpose behind this tight timeline.
Well, it's first of all, it's not just about the value of the contract, it's about the terms and conditions of the contract. So obviously those could be material to what we're discussing. The tight timeline is at present, we're asked to report back by June 23rd. We need to have the information. If we're not going, my sense is that I think that we should, I don't see what the rush is, but there seems to be some members who feel there is, and therefore this needs to be a rush too. It still does give them 2.5 business days to complete the request, and they should have this information on hand and easily available.
Mr. Gerritsen and then Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, I was just going to add, Madam Chair, there is the issue of, I imagine that the contract is written in English, so there's going to be the issue of having that completely translated. So I guess, I think we vote in favor of it, and if they are unable to produce it, then they'll give us a reason why it's going to take a couple extra days to do that. So, I mean, I'm content with the date, providing that those who are responsible can come to the terms in terms of length.
Mr. Turnbull and then Mr. Alghabra.
Along the same lines as my colleague, Mr. Gerritsen, I was going to say, I think that it's going to take some time to translate. I wonder if we could set a different date than June 15th, which seems a little bit tight in terms of time frame. Maybe we can give another three days or 2 days or something reasonable like that. Mr. Richards, would you be open to that?
No, I'm not open to that. This should be easily available. It should be able to be done by that date. If they, as Mr. Gerritsen has indicated, if they feel for some reason they can't do that and they want to come back to the committee and indicate that there is a problem with that, then we can figure out how to deal with it. But frankly, you have to ask for something. You have to put a deadline on something. And if they feel they can't comply, they'll have to explain why that is. I don't think we should be letting someone off the hook that easily.
Mr. Alghabra and then Ms. Blaney.
Look, Madam Chair, I was going to ask Mr. Richards because we are also discussing whether we are going to give ourselves a week or so to write the report. So there's a little bit more time. However, Mr. Richards seemed for one reason or another determined on the date. I'm not going to I don't know if I'm going to die on this hill. So I have no problem. I was looking for a way for all of us to compromise together on moving forward, but I'm not going to fight hard. If the House of Commons says they can't meet the deadline, they can write to us and explain to us why, and then.
Okay, Ms. Blaney and then Mr. Reid.
I'm just wanting you to know, as the chair, of course, that I am ready to have a vote at any moment here. I think I would like to get on to the witnesses as quickly as possible.
Okay, Mr. Reid.
Just to say that in the event that the contract is long, I don't think we need to translate all of it. We just need to translate the pertinent parts, and perhaps we can rely on our clerks to make that decision for us.
Perhaps that's doable. That's a good point that you've raised, Mr. Reid. Okay, so let's move forward with the vote. Mr. Clerk, could you help us out here with the vote? We'll have a recorded vote on this. Oh, actually, but just before we do, yes,
Thanks.
just before we do, Ms. Richards, could you slowly read the motion out again, please?
Yes, that the committee order the House of Commons administration to produce no later than Monday, June 15th, 2020, all contracts, master service agreements, licensing agreements, and terms and conditions, including in respect of data collection, use and disclosure of personal information, and third-party contractual arrangements that it has entered into with Zoom Video Communications, Inc., and any of its subsidiaries, affiliates, or agents.
Okay, now has everyone been able to follow the language of the motion? Yep, I see nodding. We'll proceed to a vote.
Madam Chair, can we use Mr. Vickers' device to vote on this?
Maybe at a future time, Mr. Gerritsen, maybe at a future time.
Madam Chair, this is a recorded vote on Mr. Richards' motion. Mr. Alghabra.
Yes.
Ms. Duncan.
Yes.
Mr. Gerritsen.
Oh.
Yes.
Madame Petitpas-Taylor.
Oui.
Mr. Turnbull.
Yes.
Mr. Richards.
Yes.
Mr. Broussard.
Oui.
Mr. Jennis.
Yes.
Mr. Reid.
Yes.
Madame Normandin.
Oui.
Ms. Blaney.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion is carried.
Okay, Thank you. Sorry, Ms. Petty-Pat-Taylor, I didn't see your hand go up before. Would you still like to comment?
My only comment, Madam Chair, is that I want to ensure that all documents are translated. It is unfair to say that just parts of the documents are going to be. We need to have full translation of those documents. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. We will proceed, although we have lost quite a bit of time. We'll proceed on to, let's see who is next. Mr. Garrettson for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Sorry, I just want to start my timer here too so that I can stay on track. I just wanted to go back at Mr. Gourdin. Just to be clear on what you said earlier, you think that a voting system that would be web-based or application-based, something along those lines, would be more inclusive of all members, in particular those who might be struggling with bandwidth issues in terms of internet. Is that correct?
You're asking me?
Whoever wants to answer that. Sorry, somebody started talking.
That was Mr. Garbani.
Sure, or Mr. Jourdain. He was the one that said it earlier.
Okay, so I'll jump in.
Yep.
Yes, what I was saying is that the system that is going to be the most hungry in bandwidth is going to be a video system.
So, okay, thank you.
Anything that is not video-based is going to be better.
Okay, Mr. Vickery, you said that earlier that not to rely on video. And this is interesting because the previous panel that we had on, most if not all of the members were emphasizing that their preference was video. They did make the point, at least one or two of them, they said, notwithstanding the fact that, there's deep fake and there's the possibility of this stuff down the road, they all seem to still put emphasis on the video voting as opposed to a web-based or application-based. You are taking a different approach. You're basically saying we should be concerned about that deep fake because the possibilities of it only become more real as we go down the road, and therefore we need something more secure. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, keep in mind the aspect of a necessary second or third band of confirmation that is not involved with the video system could be added as a way to validate or make it good enough. But
Right.
You have to have that other validation.
So, okay, so let's keep in mind that absolutely every vote that we take in Parliament is open and public, with the exception of one or two circumstances like electing a speaker and one issue that relates to private members' business that doesn't come up that often. Everything else is a public vote. So if, we're not worried about secrecy of the vote, keeping that vote secret. Does that impact how, your position on, we'll always be able to know. It's not as though I can vote and then my vote be changed and I'll never know about it, right? Because if there's going to be a leaderboard or something displayed somewhere online, I can always look at that and say, hey, hold on, I voted no, but that says yes. The fact that we're open and everything's public makes the accountability of it fairly reliable, correct?
It does tend to help that. However, the degradation in people's belief in the system being accurate, the very existence of the possibility that somebody could even temporarily be recorded in the wrong way tends to harm that system overall. And people understand that there are multiple layers of confirmation. That is an always existing good thing.
Yeah, and again, you made the comment where you said, in response to Mr. Genis's questions, you said, don't talk about anything private in these meetings. Again, anything we say in the House of Commons is public. The delay between our conversation now and what's streamed online for the public to see is like less than 10 seconds. So everything is out there. Everything is public. How do you see that? When you talk about the security issues and your concerns over that, do you have some comfort in knowing that everything is public like that? In using this platform, I should say. Like the worst. I was going to say the worst thing that can happen is somebody gets in and then tries to take over the meeting or something like that. But it's not as though there's going to be state secrets that are shared as a result of somebody hacking in.
I would say the worst thing that could happen is somebody's individual device being compromised and the audio being manipulated to make it sound like they said no when they meant to say or did say yes.
You don't even need the device compromised. A witness in the previous panel told us that listening, in an example in a city council meeting in Sarnia, somebody said disagree, but the person recording it heard agree, didn't hear the dis part, and that created confusion. So
that is absolutely a concern, and that's why multiple layers of validation is important.
That's all the time we have. Thank you, Madame Normandin.
Merci beaucoup. J'aurais une seule.
Thank you very much. I have but one question for the three panelists, just for my personal enlightenment. To identify voters beyond the IP address, the idea was to use biometrics, and I would like to know what we're talking about when we talk about biometrics. And is this data that the House of Commons already possesses? Is there a risk of ID theft or fraud? I'd like to hear you all on this. Perhaps I'll begin. So yes, I believe this is an important aspect that needs to be brought up. You can identify the voter using other means than a video image to ensure that the person who voted is the person you believe he or she is. Biometric identification at voting time is feasible, and most probably you all have in your pockets a phone able to do that, recognizing your thumbprint, a fingerprint, your face, facial features. So there's a link to your identity. Your identity itself isn't relayed through the server. And if you take, for example, an application, an app, you could have a very simple app. At voting time, you'd say yes or no, and then you confirm your vote, sending yes or no, and you place your thumb on the phone and your identity can be confirmed. This is a way of establishing a link between your identity and your vote without having to send a video image in real time.
Are you waiting for another response from, okay. Mr. Gorbani, do you have a response to that?
I really don't. I mean, it's important to recognize that authentication through multiple layers, including biometrics, would add more security to the operation. And as just mentioned by Vincent, is easy to implement it. So in short, yes, this might be a good thing to consider, using biometrics to authenticate people.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. Ms. Blaney, please.
So I have just one question as well, and would enjoy hearing from all of the witnesses. One of the realities that we've heard from I've heard from multiple MPs is living in family circumstances during this time, and looking at other issues like being able to have that connectivity has been something that they're concerned about. And so they want to make sure that voting is predictable and that there's a specific time, perhaps once a week, where all the votes happen, so that they know when they have to be there, when they have to make sure that they're somewhere where they physically can vote with that connectivity. So I'm just wondering, I'm looking at it from that perspective of certainty, but I'm just wondering, is there any particular security concerns that we should consider if we're looking at having a time where we regularly vote? And Mr. Jourdain, if we could start with you.
Well, out of the top of my head, I don't see any particular security issue linked to the time of voting. I think that's what you mentioned here about family being around. I think one obvious point would be to not share the device with the family and make sure that you use only dedicated hardware and a secure link if you can. But no, I don't see any obvious reason why we should worry about a particular time of voting. Again, I would stress the fact that I think if the Chinese wanted to do something to us, they are not going to do that. Try to change your own vote from yes to no from time to time, because you will see that right away. And so no, I would not be too concerned about that.
Thank you. Mr. Gurbani.
So I do not have much of a concern, except that, of course, we're giving the malicious people, guys, a schedule, so they actually can know and be prepared. So to some extent, if it is public and it is getting into hands of everyone, those who are malicious are better prepared at the time that the schedule or plan for voting, etc., will happen. But other than that, it's not going to be a big deal.
Thank you, Mr. Vickery.
I think that can be improved upon and is workable. If you have, for example, a period of 1 hour on a Tuesday every week that you take these votes, if you assign windows of time, like during these 5 minutes of that hour, XYZ members can send their votes in, and that is not publicly broadcast, that is just decided at the moment of, then yes, the bad guys will know the window overall, but they will not know and be able to predict the specific window of a few minutes that it is valid for certain members to send their vote in.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for this panel. And I want to thank all the witnesses, Mr. Gurbani, Mr. Jourdain, Mr. Vickery. You've all been excellent. And not just for this study, but from time to time, some of you have helped the House of Commons and advised us on how we can maintain a secure and safe democratic system. So thank you for that. And now we will if I can ask the witnesses to leave the meeting at this time, and so that we can carry on with some committee business.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. I hate to ask you to leave, but thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We're right at 12, so I'm hoping that we can move along really quickly. So basically, I guess my first question to the committee is last time I was sensing, not just sensing, a lot of comments were made, quite literally, wanting to have an extension, not feeling that there was enough time in 2 meetings next week to work on the draft report, be able to review it properly, and if there are any supplementary or dissenting opinions, being able to have time for that. And I know there was some also comments saying that there was understanding for that. I just wanted to know where the committee was at, and if the whole committee, if that's where we're at, if that is what we're asking for. Because essentially, if we want an extension, I would like to table a report back, hopefully tomorrow, asking for a specific extension date, because we would not be able to, we essentially need approval for an extension, and so the House would have to concur, but because we don't have routine proceedings, the House will not be able to concur, and especially if we leave it until the 23rd, that will not be possible. But there is a procedure in place where the House leaders, the 4 House leaders, can agree to give this committee an extension of what we require. And so I want to be able to give them the appropriate time to give that to us so that we know what we're dealing with next week. So is there a date? Is there agreement, first of all, on having an extension past next week? And if so, is there a date that you would like to see? Mr. Garrettson, and there's some hands up, I believe, from the previous dialogue. If you can take your hands down and then raise them back up for this.
Mr. Reed's hand is still up from last time.
I'm actually not trying to take my hand down.
Thank you. Thank you. But you can raise your hand again if you'd like to participate in this portion of the discussion. Mr. Garrettson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, I respect the discussions that have been made and the comments that have been made by, in particular, by the opposition about, the need for rush. And I certainly am in the camp that I am, want to make sure that we have a thorough report. I don't want to have the same scenario where we had an extremely long meeting last time, despite the fact that I was driving home from Ottawa during the majority, during a lot of it. So I respect that. But what I don't want is just to let this drag on and on and on. If we're going to be asking the House to do something, and presumably that would be for September, then we need to make sure that we give enough time for whoever has to do it. So therefore, I would propose that we ask for an extension to Friday, July the 10th, which would basically give us 2.5 weeks further than what we currently have. And I'm open to hearing what other people might have to say about that.
Okay. We had discussed last time that from July 23rd or 24th on to July 3rd, we would not be able to have any meetings via either virtually or in any way because there's testing happening. And so after that, that would leave us July 3rd. I should pull out my calendar. It would leave us a week at that point, but you would have all the other time that we are not able to meet in order to write or reflect. And so 1 week we would have of meeting time, and we could have some meetings in there too if you feel that meetings are necessary. But it all really depends, I think, how far we get next week to see how many meetings we would need in that coming week, or we could propose another date.
My thought, Madam Chair, was that basically up to June 23rd is when we conclude with, any other witnesses or any other discussion that we want to have about it, so that we can then have our time to go and craft our recommendations over that downtime that you mentioned.
Okay. Any opposition to asking for an extension until July 10th? There were quite a few people that had comments about not having enough time and feeling that they were rushed. So would everyone be, I think Mr. Turnbull, you're putting your hand up right now. Is there something you'd like to say?
Just wanted to say I'm fully in support of that date. I thought maybe I'd clarify. I think last time we had some discussion about witnesses, and I really felt like this Friday we have I think a meeting tomorrow for 1 hour. Is that right? With an additional witness, and I'm wondering if that could be the end of the witnesses, given the fact that I think what I heard is we're likely going to need 4 meetings. I think based on how long it took to write a report last time, that to avoid that 8-hour kind of push at the end, maybe we'd have, because as you said, June 23rd to July 3rd, we can't meet. So it effectively extending it to July 10th gives us the ability to have 2 more meetings in addition to the 2 meetings next week, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, we can squeeze in, we can have the 2. We might be able to, I can't guarantee, depending on how many committees are at the go. We could probably have more meetings than just the 2 that week, but I can't guarantee it is, since it's not our dedicated time slot. But the House administration, the team has been quite accommodating in the past, so we could even do 3, I would think.
My only point was just to clarify that we probably needed 3, maybe 4 meetings to get through the recommendations and get some agreement on how to move forward. That was my thinking. So thanks.
So we would definitely have 2 next week. We could schedule 2 in that week, but if the committee, I'm just saying, if the committee feels that they even need more than the 2 meetings a week, I can at least request it. I just don't know whether there'll be a time slot available, but sometimes they're able to accommodate.
Madam Chair, it's Justin, the clerk, commenting. I just wanted to point out to the committee, with a deadline of July the 10th, it would actually enable the committee, if that's what the will of the committee was in terms of a consideration of a draft report, to have meetings on the 16th, the 18th, as well as the 23rd of June, the 25th of June, and then the additional week, July the 7th and July the 9th. Some of those dates, especially in the run up to the July 10th date, would obviously be needed for production purposes, translation purposes, to finalize a report and have it fully ready to be sent to the Clerk of the House's office. So there may be some difficulty with meetings on that week of July the 7th, July the 9th, depending on outstanding production work that would be needed for to finish off the report.
When would you need, maybe the analyst can, Andre can help us with this as well. I know that you had sent a portion of the draft report already into translation, and I had just heard, this is for the benefit of the whole committee, that by Monday, we might be able to get in our hands a portion of the draft report. I think a large portion, I heard. And so we'll have something by this Monday, but what kind of time, Andre, do you see needed when looking for an extension? Do you think we need to extend into 1 week of July or 2 weeks of July or more than that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not to use a phrase that's been used too much maybe today, but it is really the will of the committee as to how long the extension would be and however many more meetings you'd like to have. A portion of the draft report has gone to translation. It is supposed to come back, actually might be translated by now. I'm writing a portion of the meeting of Tuesday as we speak. So when I leave this meeting, I'm going to try and complete another portion, which will all be ready for Monday. Today's meeting will not be ready for the Tuesday meeting, just because it's practically impossible. That's sort of the update from my end. I hope that's enough to go on.
When would today's meeting be ready for?
For the Thursday, hopefully.
For Thursday.
So that would be, sorry, let me get that exactly correct. That would be the 18th.
Okay. The 18th. So any other feedback? If we were looking for an extension, I need to report back. That's the urgency of this matter. I can't wait until the 23rd to make this decision. And I think our clerk can help explain that a little bit better too. Mr. Richards.
Yeah, I think that there was two different schools of thought on the rush nature of this. This potentially satisfies one of those schools of thought. I might suggest a bit of a change in it, and maybe that's just it's a flexibility thing or whatever it might be. But I mean, I like the way our clerk has laid out sort of what the effects of this would be. So the idea that we would then get the rest of June essentially to finish up with witnesses or whatever else that it is we're needing to hear. And then perhaps rather than prescribing this an exact date is just simply to say that then following whatever this, I forget what the period of time is that we're blacked out for, I'll essentially call it. But after the blackout, that then we would, based on the advice of our clerk and our analyst, based on where they're at with things, that we would then just pick up to write either a report or an interim report, whatever the case might be. And then, I would assume that's only going to take a couple of meetings, but if it takes 3 meetings or 4 meetings or whatever it takes, I guess then so be it. Because I don't think there's a huge panic that July 10th rather than July 15th or something there would be some major catastrophic occurrence that would happen if it was an extra few days. So maybe rather than an idea to extend to a specific date is simply to say that we'll continue to hear from witnesses until whatever the date was, the 25th of June or whatever it was. And then following the blackout period, the committee would recommence to finalize a report, essentially. That way we wouldn't be, we're basically having the same effect other than not putting ourselves under the gun where we end up with a 12-hour-long meeting again or something if it requires that.
So
one would hope not, of course, but so that's one thing. The second thing would be, that I still don't think it addresses the concern that I know was raised by Mr. Duncan, and I don't believe he's here now. But I certainly sympathize with that school of thought, which is that, essentially what we're doing is making recommendations in June, or in this case, maybe early July, for something that is then 2 to 2.5 months off. With how quickly this situation evolves, we may find that I think we'd want to consider it an interim report, and then we may want to come back and revisit it just for some discussion late in August or something, or first week of September, to address any, where we're at that point, and potentially make new recommendations or change existing ones or drop some of them, or whatever the case might be. So it doesn't really address that. And I don't know that we have to have a motion to do that, or I don't know how that needs to be done, but that would be my two thoughts, is that we do on the first part of it, do it in that manner. And the second part, I don't know what to suggest in terms of how to address that, but we probably should have provision. And probably the easiest thing to do is just to indicate that this would be an interim report, and then we would have the chance to revisit it when the time is appropriate, whether that's late August, early September, whatever it might be.
So at this point, after tomorrow, just to a couple of the points of witnesses, we have exhausted the witnesses that we've already had requested, that all the parties put forward. So that witness list has been exhausted. And from what we've heard just from Andre, we will have the complete finalized draft report to us by the 18th of June. So by the 18th of June, we'll have a translated full draft report that includes up to tomorrow. And we will need have a drafted motion that the clerk has helped drafted. We will need to have something to ask for if we don't meet our extension, our current deadline, and that I need to get in as soon as possible. So there's some hands up. The rest is up to when you think that should be. Miss Blaney, then Mr. Gerritsen, then Mr. Richards again.
Well, thank you, Chair. Thank you, first of all, for clarifying. That was the question I was going to ask. Was there any outstanding witnesses that time has prevented us from seeing? And it sounds like that is not the case. I think my one concern, and I agree, I think I would like to set a date. I think it's important for the House to know when we're going to have this completed. I do agree with Mr. Richards, if there is a way for us to be able to come back in the end of August, beginning of September, to look at what's happened. I know for myself, I'll be watching closely what's happening in British Columbia, because of course they're going to start going back to their legislature and doing it in a hybrid model towards the end of June. It would be good for us to have an opportunity to reflect on anything that we've seen. So I do encourage that we consider that seriously. But I think that maybe the following week, maybe the 15th or the 17th of July, and I say that hoping that we could meet the week of the 10th, but then give ourselves time at the end to get the final reports done, to have them tabled. I just don't want to see us rushing again, the day after the 9th, for example. I just think about last time, and we were trying to get our report done and then get it translated and submitted, and that was just a very short timeline. So I'm especially thinking of that. So that's my sense of the conversation at this point, and look forward to hearing from other people.
That sounds fair. I think there's probably a way the committee can report back with their recommendations, and also perhaps ask for that review mechanism or further input, or whatever it is that the committee desires to provide feedback to the House of Commons again on the issue. Mr. Gerritsen, and then Mr. Richards.
40 minutes ago, we had no problem imposing a strict deadline on the bureaucrats to produce information on translation, to work over the weekend to translate a contract and any other contracts. I think it's entirely fair that we put a deadline on ourselves and create a deadline for ourselves, and we work towards that. I think that, we're willing to say that, June 23rd or the 18th, whenever the original deadline was, is a little tight.
June 23rd.
23rd is a little tight. So let's, work to find another date. But by no means should we be setting ourselves up in a position to say, well, if we can't make it, then I guess we'll go a little bit longer. When 40 minutes ago, we basically told people on the Hill that they have to work over the weekend. I mean, that's the reality of what we just did. So, Madam Chair, with that, I'll move that we ask for an extension to July the 10th.
Mr. Richards?
So couple of things. First of all, you had indicated, Chair, that we'd exhausted the witness list. I'll make a couple of points to that. First of all, there's a couple of ways that a witness list can be exhausted. One of them can be that every witness who desired to be heard was heard. The other way could be, and I suspect it's probably the case in this scenario, when we're rushed like we were, that they were offered a certain time, or maybe they were unavailable during this couple of week period that they had, and would have liked to have had the chance, but just didn't get the chance because of the rush timeline. So we may find that if we have more time, there may be other witnesses who did wish to be heard. The second point to that was that parties were all encouraged to submit short lists because we were rushed on time. There may be other witnesses that people have that they wish to suggest that they chose not to because they didn't have the time and sort of had to prioritize. So, I think that to say that we wouldn't have other witnesses would maybe not necessarily be accurate.
Yeah.
And given that we would then
we have to empty the room.
We're
yeah. Okay, we're running out of time. This is why I was hoping that on Wednesday we could have had a 1 hour committee business meeting, but at that time the committee didn't really feel we would need a whole lot of time on this issue. I feel that it seems like we do. Well, we got to clear the room, so we've got to set aside another time for committee business, I guess. And I've got to figure that out then and set that. Yes, Justin.
If in terms of additional time, we do have a meeting with one witness tomorrow for a 1 hour meeting. We could put on the meeting notice, another opportunity for committee business. It would again be fairly brief. Now, seeing as the committee is moving towards an idea of some sort of extension, at the beginning of the Tuesday, June 16th meeting, next Tuesday, it is a full 3 hour meeting that we will have. There could be an opportunity right off the top for some additional committee business. If tomorrow's opportunity doesn't finish off the discussion and reach a decision, there might be an opportunity at the beginning of the Tuesday meeting to do that. And there would still be a chunk of time in the balance of that meeting to, if this is what the committee ultimately wanted to do, to start in on at least a portion of the draft report as Andre currently has it.
Also, Mr. Garrettson had moved a date. What can we do with that? Is your point of order on what I'm just about to bring up, or?
Well, no, I just want to make sure that I understand correctly from a procedural perspective. If we don't end up asking for an extension, we're ultimately stuck to the June 23rd one, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Madam Chair, I could.
Yes, Mr.
I could provide some clarity on that. So essentially the House motion of May 26th was a motion of instruction asking the committee to do a study on possible standing order changes, incremental steps towards a hybrid parliament, including remote voting. They had a June 23rd reporting deadline in that, so that the committee would be under some sort of obligation to report something back by June 23rd. As I've indicated before, the nature of that report could, for example, be a recommendation to extend the deadline to some future point, but that's why ultimately the committee needs a specific hard deadline and make a determination on that, whether it's July 10th, whether it's some other date down the road. There would be a need to do that. If the committee makes that type of decision, that would be the report. That could be a report that gets sent back to the clerk of the House. But of course, before a deadline can actually be made formal or made official, the House needs to concur in it. Now, because we don't have the sittings in the usual way where a motion can be moved in a concurrence to committee report during routine proceedings, there would need to be some other mechanism in place that would permit the House to give essentially its approval to your recommendation to move the reporting deadline to some other date. There are different ways of doing that. There are these special motions that have been done in the House before that we've seen since the beginning of the pandemic. It could be done that way. There is a special provision from one of those motions, April 23rd, where if the 4 House leaders of the recognized parties agree to a recommendation in a PROC report, such as a recommendation to extend the deadline, that could give effect to it as well. But simply you deciding to move it to another date does not necessarily actually guarantee that there will be a new deadline officially made or officially set. So the first step, obviously, is to make a decision if that is what you want, to ask for a deadline extension, and then, of course, determine what that actual specific date would be, whether it's soon, whether it's later.
Is that something that can be decided by majority vote, Justin, or is it something that we need consensus
Madam
on?
Chair, Madam Chair, we have a motion on the table. Can we vote before we leave the room?
That's what I'm asking for. So is that a votable motion?
Point of order.
Mr. Richards?
Yes, a point of order. I did have the floor. I'm not comfortable we're at a spot where voting on this is appropriate. There was still discussion being had. If we're now being told that we're able to continue to meet, I'd like to continue the discussion. If we can't, then we'll have to set aside another time, as you've indicated. First of all, second part on the point of order is you had indicated there's been some allusion to a meeting tomorrow. No one on my side, amongst the Conservative opposition, was aware of the meeting tomorrow. No one knows when or what the business would be. Can you fill us in on what happened there and how that came to be?
So this was
what
discussed.
The plans are for the said meeting.
Yeah, this was discussed in the last meeting that we had a 1-hour time slot that was available, and we had asked some of the international witnesses that had indicated, just like how you had mentioned before, there were some witnesses that had indicated that they were not interested, and others that had indicated that they were interested, except the previous time was not doable for them. So we once again went back to those witnesses to see if they'd still like to appear. So we do have one for the time slot tomorrow, and the rest of the time we can dedicate to committee time.
Madam Chair, I could mention that the meeting notice for tomorrow will be published after today's meeting. So it should be coming out in the next hour or so.
The time slot would be 11 to 12.
That's correct.
11 to 12.
We vote, please.
Point of order, Madam Chair. No, that's not possible. I have the floor, and I think there is discussion we need to take. I've got some other ideas on how we might be able to proceed. And if we have time for that discussion, I'd love to continue to share them. But
Mr. Richards, right? They're on debate right now on that motion.
I'll just note that I have the floor as well. I'm sorry, I don't know the floor, but I'm on the list thing.
All right. I guess since we're at a point where we cannot vote on the motion right now, since debate is ongoing, we will wrap up for today, and we will carry on from this point in committee business tomorrow. Okay. See you tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Thank you.